Good morning and welcome to Parkinson's Life Beyond the Basics. This event is PCLA's signature annual education conference, and we are so excited because today's program includes PCLA's Medical Advisory Board. We have 5 exceptional speakers and some really interesting topics. I am Patrick LoSasso, president of Parkinson's Community Los Angeles. And if this is your first time at a PCLA event, welcome. You're in for something really special. We are a Los Angeles-based nonprofit helping families with Parkinson's live better by providing free educational events, support groups, information and referrals, and a medical equipment gifting program, and so much more. And by the way, I want to welcome the PCLA board. They're all here. And speaking on behalf of our group, it's been an incredible journey that has gone so fast. This year, we are celebrating our 5th anniversary serving the Los Angeles community. But now, because we've gone virtual, we reach families with PD internationally. So welcome to everyone far and near. We're so glad you're with us today. Today's event is being recorded and will be posted to our PCLA YouTube channel. None of your images will be in it. And you'll receive a link as soon as it's available so you can share it with your friends and groups. I want to acknowledge our Life Beyond the Basics sponsors for making today possible. Thank you, Arcadia, Abbott, AbbVie, Boston Scientific, Medtronic, and the PCLA Sandy Yaris Parkinson's Hero Fund for enabling us to provide this free program. It's because of their support and the support of people like you that help us provide these events. So if you enjoy today, please visit PCLA.org and make your tax-deductible donation. There's a link to it in the chat as well, I believe, or it's just PCLA.org. Please, we need your help. You'll also find today's schedule posted in the chat as well. The presenters will answer questions at the end of each presentation. Please enter your questions into the chat, and if we don't get to them all because of time, we will provide answers from our experts to you via email. I'm also really excited because we have an exceptional yoga instructor, Kathleen Ross-Allee. I know her work, she's amazing, and she'll be leading us in a 15-minute movement break with some Parkinson's-specific yoga. She's wonderful. And at the end, we have something really special planned for you today. Immediately after this program, you're invited to come back and join us in breakout rooms. You can meet our sponsors one-on-one and learn more about their treatments for Parkinson's. Kathleen Ross-Allee will also be there in a room to talk to you about yoga, and PCLA will be there in our room to speak with you one-on-one. I'll be there with other board members, and we love to say hello. We want to hear from you. Your opinion is what charts our path forward. Now, I know this online stuff can be new and confusing, so we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. There's a link to this exclusive event in your registration email, and we'll be sending a fresh email at the end, so you will have it at the top of your emails so you can go into the breakout rooms, stick around, and check it out. Now, to make sure we're all poised and alert, I'm going to run us through a quick celebration of movement and a stretch to perk us up and get us ready for the programming and to bring us together. And there's nothing better to bring us together than a little mischief. So here we go. Let me push back. Okay, here we go. I want you all to get to the front of your chair. Hopefully you have a chair without arms. If you do, just be careful, don't bang your elbows. We're gonna sit up nice and tall in our chair and take a big breath in and exhale. And as I said, we're gonna make a little mischief. Oh, what's that? We got a little pile of leaves over here. We're gonna open our hands up and we're gonna reach down and grab a fistful of leaves in each hand. And we're going to toss those leaves up and over the fence onto our neighbor's lawn. Exaggerate those hand actions, open them up, grab a fistful and toss them across. And oh, look over here. There's another pile of leaves. Grab a pile of leaves in this hand and let's hit the other neighbor's lawn over there. I mean, I think these leaves came from their trees anyway. Up and over the neighbor's lawn, exaggerate the hands, big fistful of hands. And now let's alternate down to the right, up to the left and down to the left and up to the right. Keep your spine neutral, back and forth. 2 more, up over here and up over there. And now we're going to do a quick stretch I call 5 scoops of ice cream that today has more meaning than it did when I first came up with it. You're going to reach across the counter, open your hand up, lean forward at the hips like this, and tell the person working there that today you're having 5 scoops of ice cream. You're going to sit up tall, tap your fingers together, your fingertips, and stretch forward with the other hand, telling them you're going to have 5 scoops of ice cream. And I want you to reach back behind you and tell the person standing respectfully 6 feet in line behind you that you're treating yourself to 5 scoops of ice cream. During COVID, we lost a couple friends and we had some beautiful memorial services. And the rabbi on one of these services said, she told us this story about this couple that had been married for years, and they found themselves at a Jewish deli having lunch. And the husband said, honey, today I'm going to treat myself to the corned beef sandwich. And she said, honey, that has too many calories. Why don't you have the chicken soup? And he begrudgingly relented, stretched forward and reached back and had the chicken soup. Well, sadly, the next day he passed away. And his wife was racked with guilt because on his last day on earth, she had deprived him of the simple pleasure of the corned beef sandwich. So not every day, maybe not even once a week. None of us know when our numbers are coming up, but every once in a while, you treat yourselves to those 5 scoops of ice cream. One last time here and one last time there. Press, press, press. Sit back up straight. Externally rotate those arms into the no money stretch. Lower your hands to the legs. Big breath in and exhale. I'd say we're ready. Let me come back in here. Okay, I'm so pleased to present our first speaker, Dr. Arik Johnson. He is a clinical psychologist who has worked with neurological disorders, including Parkinson's disease, for many years. He will be talking to us today about the cognitive changes that can happen with Parkinson's disease. Until recently, Dr. Johnson was at UCLA, where he saw people with Parkinson's within UCLA's movement disorder program. And I want to congratulate you, Arik, on your new appointment as the Chief Mission Officer of the Huntington's Disease Society of America. And I want to thank you for your many years of serving the Parkinson's community for your work on PCLA's Medical Advisory Board. It has been a real privilege to work with you, and thank you for being here today.
Patrick, thank you so much. And to all of you that are out there right now, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this community. And as Patrick said, I did work up until about a month ago at the movement disorder clinic at UCLA, working with people who have Parkinson's disease and atypical Parkinsonian disorders. And I'm so glad to have this opportunity to talk to you today, even though I'm not in that space anymore. But welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm gonna get my screen up here for y'all. I am excited to talk to you today about some of the cognitive changes that people can experience when living with Parkinson's disease. And when we talk about cognitive changes, I'm going to put this into 2 different areas. There's the first, which we call mild cognitive impairment. These are changes in thought, thinking, or memory that are more than you might expect for normal aging. Right? You know, as we get older, we all start to experience some changes in our ability to recall things, or, you know, you walk into the room and it's like, why am I here? Right? With mild cognitive impairment, sometimes it's just a little bit more so than that. It's not really enough to largely interfere with a person's activities of daily living, but it can have an impact that they are aware of. So things might be harder to do, they might not be impossible, but you're recognizing, this is something that's happening. Estimates vary as to how often this occurs, but it can happen looking at the different studies out there, it can happen anywhere between 20 to 50% of people living with Parkinson's. So something to be thoughtful of, something to be aware of, something to talk to your care team about. The other category of changes in thought is dementia. And with dementia, this is it's kind of like a much bigger version of mild cognitive impairment. It's something that actually is significant enough to interfere with how someone engages in their activities of daily living. Very often it is known because there are changes in more than one of the domains of thought. And I'll talk about those a little bit more, but generally with dementia, you're going to see this happening in multiple areas at the same time. This can occur in approximately 40% of people who are living with Parkinson's disease, but it's important to note that this is usually well after a person is diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and often when they're in advanced disease. So think later in the process. Sometimes people say, what's the relationship between MCI and dementia? Well, sometimes mild cognitive impairment stays the same. Sometimes it gets a little bit worse. Sometimes it can progress to dementia. There's no clear roadmap that's going to say you go from point A to point Z, right? It can be different for everyone. Like we talk about with Parkinson's all the time, there's a lot of different ways that it looks and a lot of differences in the way people experience it. I'm just going to touch on this really briefly because I think you'll hear what I say and say, duh. Why do people with Parkinson's disease experience cognitive changes? Well, in part, it's because of the changes in the brain due to having Parkinson's disease. And this can affect the brain in a couple of ways. First, there's the neurochemical there's the neurochemicals, these compounds in our brain that carry messages that make things happen. There's things that can occur in the neurochemical process that can affect people's cognition. That includes some of the neurochemical signals you'll be familiar with Parkinson's, things like dopamine, acetylcholine, serotonin. These are things that can be affected because of the disease itself, which in turn can affect the way people think. The other thing is cellular damage. When things aren't going the way they're supposed to within the cells of the brain, they cause the cells themselves to break down. There are in other diseases like Alzheimer's, we talk about alpha-synuclein, which clumps up in the cells and causes them to deteriorate. Well, the same thing can happen in Parkinson's disease, where we have alpha-synuclein clump up and it forms what we call Lewy bodies. And you might be familiar with Lewy body dementia, which is a little bit different than Parkinson's disease and dementia related to Parkinson's. It's the formation of these clumps, these problematic groups of protein in the cells that cause the cells to die, that can cause change. Something that I always like to talk to with patients when I was working with them was there are a lot of other things that can influence and it's important to be aware of that because you might be experiencing something else that's causing cognitive changes that's not distinctly a part of the Parkinson's disease. First and foremost, other health conditions. If you're sick with something else, if you've got an underlying infection, if you've got another health condition that you're dealing with, that can affect the way that you think. Really quick, I like to throw this out there too. If people experience a rapid change in cognition, if you experience a rapid decline, like over the course of 2 days, you went from, perfectly functional to like, I can't remember my name, something else is going on besides Parkinson's disease. So get to the doctor to rule out something that might be underlying that's contributing to that. Okay, back to this. Another factor that can affect cognition is medication. The medications that you take for other conditions, as well as the medications you take to treat your symptoms of Parkinson's disease, can sometimes have effect on the way that you think. Mood symptoms, depression, anxiety, other psychiatric symptoms can also affect cognition. Sleep disturbance. I think this is an important thing and hopefully something that everyone is aware of. If you aren't sleeping well, it realistically can affect the way that you think. I like to say that's what's going on with me right now as I inadvertently opened a window on my screen that I'm trying to get rid of so I can talk to you and see what I'm talking about. There we go. I'm blaming the lack of sleep. Sleep disturbances can affect the way you think. Also, the after effect of not sleeping well, or just by living with Parkinson's, people can experience fatigue. That can also affect the way that you think. So just to point out, if people experience changes in thinking, it's not necessarily just Parkinson's. There's other things that could be at play. Talk to your doctor, talk to your team about this. All right. So that's all fine and good. How do we manage these things? How do you manage that? There are some medications available that can be helpful. And I emphasize they can be because they're not helpful for everybody, and they're not necessarily approved strictly for treating cognitive changes in Parkinson's disease, but they come from Alzheimer's. So these are medications that we know can be beneficial. Some of them you might be familiar with. Of course, if you've got questions about meds, you talk to your medical doctor about it. Not everything is appropriate for everyone for multiple different reasons, but these are 3 that are common that you've probably heard about before. And if you do talk to your docs about it, these might be things that you have a conversation about. Now, let's talk a little bit on the bulk of what I want to share with you guys today, which is the kinds of cognitive changes that people might experience and what you can do to try to work better with them. So I mentioned before those domains of cognition. I'm going to get into, I think 6 of them I got here today that are common for people living with Parkinson's disease. So we'll talk about the domains and talk about what you might do about it. The first domain is attention. This is how well you are able to focus on something, kind of narrow your focus to pay attention to something, narrow your focus onto one thing while avoiding or ignoring the other things, right? So people who have mild cognitive impairment or cognitive changes due to Parkinson's can sometimes experience, it's harder for them to focus on something. They get more easily distracted, or they can't maintain focus on something. It's like you have a hard time concentrating. The very common thing is a much harder time multitasking, shifting tasks, or doing multiple things at the same time. So how can you deal with this? And I just want to say, when I'm talking about how you can deal with it, I'm talking to the person who's living with Parkinson's and the person who's living with the person with Parkinson's, because these are things that can be done individually and together, and especially in talking to your care team. Take their advice, get their input, and then how can you work it into your own care plan at home? So how can you work with problems with attention? First and foremost, try to minimize distractions. If I was sharing my entire screen with you guys right now, you would say, okay, Arik, practice what you preach, because I've got like 5 things up there and it is distracting. So what do? Close windows on your screen. Try to do one thing at a time at home. If you've got a list of chores to do for the day, don't try to do multiples. Take them one at a time. Minimize the distractions as much as possible. If you're having dinner, turn the TV off. If you are talking to someone on the phone, don't talk to a person in the room at the same time. Take down the number of stimuli, minimize the distractions. It makes it easier to pay attention. Try not to overwhelm yourself with input. I'm just thinking about, what it's like going into the holiday season, and it seems like we're on input overload, and that can really be problematic for people who are living with cognitive changes. So try to calm the environment down as much as possible. Try to minimize the sources. Try to keep a person from being overwhelmed. I say this to people who are living with Parkinson's and the people who don't have Parkinson's as well. You can get overwhelmed too. So try to minimize the inputs. Another area that can be impacted by changes, another cognitive area that can be impacted by Parkinson's disease is that of executive functioning. Now, executive functioning is kind of an umbrella term for kind of the boss part of your brain, the thing that is in control of everything. This is an area that, when impaired, can affect things like a person's ability to organize, right? A person who's got cognitive changes due to Parkinson's might feel more disorganized. Man, it's harder for me to keep all of these things on track. You can have a hard time planning, putting things into a hierarchy or structuring things. It can make it harder to do problem solving, right? If you are at home and all of a sudden the faucet shoots out the sink and you're just like, oh my God, what do I do about this, right? And your brain would normally say you start doing steps 1, 2, and 3. It's harder to jump to it in the moment. It's harder to put those things in order. It's harder to figure it out when there's increased stress. And another thing that people can experience too is what we call decreased mental flexibility. I don't know if any of you have ever worked with someone who's really set in their ways. Decreased flexibility, or this inflexibility, is someone who just can't change their mind about something. No, it's got to be this way. It can only be this way, even if that way isn't working. So how might you work with changes in executive functioning? Going back to that kind of analogy of this is the boss part of the brain, use the tools that you would to whip things into shape. Structures, routines, schedules. Try to build things that you can work within that, when practiced, provide a kind of structure, provide that scaffolding, provide containment so that you know what's coming up. Every day my alarm goes off at 7 a.m. Every day at 8 o'clock, I have breakfast. Every day at 9 o'clock, I take my walk. Things like that are great approaches, having things that are anchored in set times that you practice regularly. Life doesn't allow you to always do it that way, but the more that you can build a structure or a routine in, the better. Using things like checklists or calendars, things that help you remember what that structure is, what that schedule is. Things that when you see it kind of trigger your brain to go, oh yeah, that's right, I've got this thing to go. I put the cell phone up there because if you're good with technology, use it. These things can be great. You can use calendars, to-do lists, alarms, all kinds of programs that are available, all the apps that are out there that can sometimes be helpful. Using lists, using planners, again, it's these kinds of tools that help anchor your routines, anchor your schedules, anchor the things that you need to do. And lastly, and I think this is important for all of us to think about, is sometimes it's just about breaking something down into smaller units, right? If I say, hey, I have to clean the house, that's kind of overwhelming. Like, oh God, that's a lot that I got to do. But if I say I need to clean the kitchen, okay, that's still a lot to do, but that's a little bit less than cleaning the whole house. And if I say, you know what, I need to empty the dishwasher first, what I've done is I take this big overarching goal and I start breaking it down into smaller units. And those smaller units are so much easier to approach and so much easier to manage. So I like to say that not just for people who are living with Parkinson's, but in general, some of these things can be helpful. Language is another domain that can be impaired when living with Parkinson's disease. And what this means is that word finding difficulty. Man, I know what I want to say. It's right there on the tip of my tongue, right? Word finding difficulties can be a little bit more so than the usual word finding difficulties that we see. There's also there's a possibility that you can have a harder time understanding complex sentences, right? I've just been prattling on, saying a lot of things pretty quickly. It might be harder to put all that together and understand what it means. Another thing that is part with language is it's harder to produce the words. It's harder to actually make the words, be it physically or because of what's going from the brain to the mouth to get the words out. Probably heard of dysarthria, right? So this is something that can also be occurring. So what do you do with it? The easiest thing, this is something that we can always do when you're talking to someone with Parkinson's, give them a little bit more time to respond. Hey, I need to know what you want right now. You got to tell me, what's happening. I'm stressing someone out, but I'm also not giving them an opportunity to respond to my question. So take a breath. Hey, I've got this question. What do you think? Give the person time. This is an area that I also will say, talk to a specialist. Talking to someone who works with people who have speech and language difficulties. Talk to a speech therapist or a speech and language pathologist. They can offer a lot of really specific tools that can be useful if you're dealing with language issues. Memory. Memory can be impaired in Parkinson's. Memory can also change as we age. So again, paying attention to this over time. People who have problems with memory, it's harder to take in new information and code it into the brain and then ultimately pull it back out. So learning and recall can be impaired. Oftentimes, and especially with the kind of more mild cognitive impairments, we see changes in a person's ability to recall short-term information. So I'd say, hey, remember this word, red. What word did I just say, right? That's immediate recall. Short-term would be me asking you that a couple of minutes later. More often than not, we see changes in that immediate and short-term recall, more so than long-term, right? So what you did when you were 22 years old, you can tell me that pretty easily, right? We all tend to hold on to that long-term memory a little bit better, except in dementia. There we can see an impairment in both short-term and long-term recall. So how do we deal with memory? If you've ever talked to me before, you know I'm a big fan of a Post-it note, even though we're trying to move into like a paper-free world and all of that. I think Post-it notes are an amazing. I used to have a picture that I would show that someone had told me they put a Post-it note right on the back of their door that says close the door, so that every time they walked through it, they saw the note that reminded them to close the door. What's great about tools like that Post-it note is not only do you have the content that's written on it, but sometimes just seeing that Post-it note itself. And that's why I love the kind of brightly colored ones. If you see that bright orange thing out of the color of your eye, you go, oh, right, that's what that means. Having these triggers, having these little reminder sources can be really great. Again, using technology, if you're tech friendly, man, there's apps that are out there like pill reminders for people with Parkinson's. Having your phone say, it's time for that morning medication, it's time for afternoon medication. These kinds of things can be really useful. If you're not tech friendly, they can also be overwhelming. So you got to kind of figure that one out for yourself. I saw this recommendation and I loved it. And then I found that picture of that drawer. Man, I want to go to a party at whose ever house that is, because I think it's like all about the wine and cheese from what I can tell. Keeping things in the same place. If you have memory issues, don't go shifting things up. Do things in a kind of set way. I know that my keys go here, right? So often we say, you know, it's like if you've got a little table by the front door, have a little bowl to put your keys in right there so that you know, every time I come in the door, I put my keys here. Every time I walk out the door, I grab my keys from here. Having set places for things absolutely helps. Keeping notes, again, I think this is great. If you have some memory issues and you're going to your doctor's appointment, write some questions down before you even go. And lastly, practice and repeat. Doing it once doesn't guarantee it's going to happen. Practice it. Practice it together. Practice it as a family. Practice it. Because the more we practice something, the better we get at it. The better we get at it, the more likely we are to get something out of it. People who are living with Parkinson's can also experience a change in processing speed. What does this mean? It just takes more time to do a mental task. The brain moves a little bit slower, much like the body moves a little bit slower. That can happen in the brain. It's not that you can't do it, it just takes longer. So I should have put these recommendations the opposite order. Again, be patient. Allow a little bit more time. Because the person doesn't respond immediately, because they don't do it quickly enough, doesn't mean that they can't or they won't. They just might need some more time. Another thing that can help with processing speed is ask questions that are yes or no, or either or. What would you like for dinner tonight? What does that mean, right? Instead of saying that, say, do you want chicken or do you want beef? Oh, this is an easier thing to respond to. When you limit the options, it makes it easier for a person to respond to. Lastly, the last domain I'm going to talk about is visual spatial skills. I'm going to pause for just a moment because I just want to tell you all right now, this is the closest I've been to on time for anything in a long time when it comes to a presentation. So just wanted to share that. If I'm running through it, you'll have access to all this info later. Visual spatial skills is how we're able to seeing, taking information in through vision and processing it. This can be impaired in Parkinson's. So things like being able to estimate distance, right? Think about trying to step up onto, you're walking across the street and you got to step up onto a high curb. There's a couple of things going on here. How far is it to get to that curb? And ultimately, depth perception. How big of change of elevation is that? Both of these things can be impaired in Parkinson's, both that estimation of distance and the ability to determine depth perception. This can impair a person because it makes it harder for you to really mentally map out where things are in space. And if you don't have a good spatial map, trying to navigate through that space can become more complicated. So what might we do about this? I was trying to find a good image for what a home for someone living with Parkinson's disease might look like. I would get rid of that rug that's on the floor. I would also have a higher table than that, and especially a higher chair, because good luck getting out of that chair. It looks really difficult. It's a low rider. But what I wanted to point out is simplify the environment. as much as you can. You might not strip your house down to bare bones things, but try to minimize things that could be in the way or not be seen in a way that a person's going to be able to react to, right? That's why we talk about floor rugs a lot. When people are having some of the issues with kind of like little shuffle steps, if you're walking that way and all of a sudden you get to a big old shag rug, there's issues that could come into play that could affect someone's safety. So try to simplify the environment. Another thing, especially for nighttime, especially if you wake up in the middle of the night and you have to go to the bathroom, having strategically placed lighting so that you can have a better sense of what is going on, right? I found a thing on the stairs, which stairs at night, hopefully you're not having to do that, but even just down the hallway or even just from your bed to the bathroom, having some little like directly spaced lights that point out where you're going can be really helpful to minimize some of the problems that can come if you have visual spatial issues. And now just some quick general recommendations before we jump into some questions. But first and foremost, if you think you're experiencing a cognitive change, if you say, hey, I'm having a harder time, you know, I went into the kitchen and I opened the refrigerator and then I forgot what I was going there for. If you're having things like this happening, talk about it. A lot of times people will keep these things to themselves, right? Talking about it is great because you might find that you're talking about something that is fairly normal or something that is not as bad as you think it is. But because you're holding it in and you're thinking about it, you can start to feel badly about it as well. So this can start to impact the way you think. So talk about it to your family, your friends, your care team. Bring these things up to your doctors, right? There's a lot that you can do in the doctor visit where they'll ask you some questions that can kind of get to this, but there's other ways. If you really think you're having problems and your doctor says, okay, this might be what's going on, there's ways that they can get information on this that they can share with you that you can then work with. And lastly, talk about it with your community. That's why groups like PCLA are so awesome, because you can go to a support group and you might learn something from someone who's living it that you take to heart and say, oh, wow, that's something that I might try as well. So don't keep it to yourself. Talk about it. Share it with your team. And hopefully now in the last few minutes that we have, ask some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. This is incredible. What some great information. I was riveted. We have a couple of questions here. When should one consider to take or try medication for cognitive deterioration? This is from Angela.
Great. Hey, Angela, that's a great question. And it's not really a one-size-fits-all model. So this is why you're talking to your doctor about it. Hey, doc, I've been noticing these things. Your doctor is going to ask you some very specific questions. Okay, how often does it happen? You know, what kind of places does it occur? Based on what information they're getting, they might say, this is something that you should just maybe talk to someone about, like a speech and language pathologist, or talk to a behavioral counselor, or they might say, this is a case where we can consider a medication. It's really going to depend on kind of the severity of what it is that's going on and a lot of other factors about that person's well-being. So if you're thinking that you're recognizing cognitive changes, first and foremost, talk to your doctor. Then they can talk to you about where you might consider going.
Great. And let me just toss this out to the community. If you have questions, we're submitting questions through the chat. So go ahead and type them in. So a question from Ross, I think this is how he's phrasing it. Can someone talk about driving as a visual spatial issue? Or would you consider driving a visual spatial issue?
Driving requires a lot of the different cognitive domains to be functioning. But absolutely driving from a visual spatial issue, if you're not sure how far you have between the front of your car and the car in front of you, that's problematic, right? So it absolutely taps in, it falls into that category. But there's other things like processing speed. How quickly do you react to changes that are going on? Talking about driving in Parkinson's is a whole other thing. And, you know, even though I've moved out of the Parkinson space, man, I'll volunteer right now, Patrick. If anyone wants me to come back and talk about driving cessation, I'm always happy to do so because it's a huge topic.
I am going to take you up on that for sure. And I know everyone that's listening is going, yes, when's that going to happen? We'll put that together. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Michael asks, what helps us in expressing ourselves to others or finding the words to say?
Michael, that's a great question and a complicated one because there can be a lot of layers to this. If we're talking just about the cognitive changes that might lead to a person having a harder time finding the words, sometimes it's just about making sure that you take some time. If you're aware that you're having word finding difficulties, if you're going to have a conversation with someone, you might even go so far as to say, hey, I just want to let you know I've been having a little bit harder time finding words sometimes. So I'm going to ask you to just give me a little bit more time. A lot of times people don't like to do that, right? We don't like to let other people know that we're having a hard time. And we sometimes don't want to put another person out by making a request like that. I encourage you to try, especially with the people you're closest to first. It's a little bit easier. If it's your spouse, hey, honey, I'm having an issue with this, and I know this is a really important thing for us to talk about. Can you give me just a minute to get through it? Sometimes making that ask. Sometimes about finding the words to say is more than just a cognitive change. Sometimes that's a psychological thing too, right? Like, how comfortable are you with expressing wants, needs? How comfortable are you in disagreements, things like that. So there's a number of different layers to it, but first and foremost, I'd say let people know.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more. What response can we expect regarding positive improvements and side effects if we decide to start a Parkinson's cognition medication? You mentioned 3 meds.
I'm not going to get deep into side effects. That's, of course, something that you're going to want to talk to your medical doctor about. But if you are talking to your neurologist or your doctor and they agree that this is maybe something to try, the expected improvement would be doing a little bit better in the area that you didn't think you were doing good in, right? If you went in and said, hey, I'm having some memory issues, some word finding problems, and your doctor said, you know, let's try one of these things, the hope is that you would feel a little bit better about your ability to recall things. You would recognize that, oh, I'm doing a little bit better in that area. As far as side effects go, there's different side effect profiles for all medications, as well as different interactions. So that's why it's a more complicated conversation to have with your medical doctor.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Johnson. This was absolutely fabulous. I want to thank you so much for your time. And again, I want to wish you the best of luck. You're with the Huntington's population. They're so lucky to have you. And we will miss you, but we'll take you up on that driving spatial thing. That sounds really like a great topic that people.
I'm still around, Patrick, and I don't want to leave completely. So okay. Hope you all enjoyed this. Hope it was helpful, and hope to talk to you all again in the future.
Thank you so much. So if anybody has a question afterwards for Dr. Johnson, just enter in the chat. And like I said, we'll try to get you an emailed question. We'll be sending a list of those questions out to everybody. So thank you so much. Before we get into our next presentation, we thought it'd be a good idea to kind of get people up and do a little quick stretch to get our circulation going again. So I'm going to run us in a brief standing routine here for a stretch. Now, before I get out of my chair, I want to caution all of you, if anybody has balance issues, you can do this still in the chair. Be very careful. We're gonna work on a little routine that's gonna help us open up and address some things that can happen with posture. So, like I said, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna move back. If you have a chair, a good way to position it might be right in front of you here. I don't need a chair, so I'm gonna move it over here. We're gonna only do this for about maybe 2 minutes just to get us up and moving. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a big breath in and open up into the no money stretch and take an exhale. I love the no money stretch. I use it all the time. It's like the best named stretch. No money. Big breath in again. And exhale. And what I'm going to ask you to do is spread your base out a little bit. And we're going to do something that addresses some postural issues that can happen with Parkinson's. Parkinson's can draw us forward and down, make our chest tight. And we want to be able to continue to keep that spine healthy and be able to go up into extension and rotation. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our right hand, we're going to reach across our body as if we have a bag of an endless supply of Frisbees here. And we're going to throw that Frisbee up and across. As we release the Frisbee, we're going to open the palm up and spread the hand up, spread the hand out, softly reaching up and across. And I'm going to arch back and I'm going to glance up towards my hand to cause that wonderful extension. And you can almost feel the weight of your arm opening up that chest. If you want, you can take your fingertips and dig them into your armpit there and push your thumb into your chest muscle there. That'll add a little more stretch. Just do it a couple of times and then release it, and you'll feel it open up a little more. And we're going to go to the other side now. So reach across here to this bag of Frisbees over there and throw it up and across. And again, as you release, open that hand up, turning the palm up towards the sky, arching back. Maybe take your fingertips and kind of press them into your armpit and press that thumb into your pec there. And up and open, arching back, glancing back towards it. Then release that and open it up. Breathe. And for the last one, we're going to cross our hands across our body. I'm going to push my hips back and I'm going to sweep up and open and arch back as if we're opening our hands up, tilting our face back to catch a giant beach ball right in our face. Bam. Oh, that felt good. Breathe. One more. Up, up, up. Arch back a little bit. Now lower your hands down to your sides. Bring your feet back beneath you. Take a nice big breath in. Externally rotate to the no money stretch. Lower your hands. Chin is level. And I think we're ready to move on. Okay. Hope that helped us wake up a little bit. So join me in welcoming our next speaker, Dr. Adrienne Keener. Dr. Keener is a movement disorders specialist at UCLA and the West Los Angeles VA. She participates in clinical research and patient care and is interested in interdisciplinary treatment approaches for movement disorders, including DBS, botulinum toxin injections, hope I said that right, and rehabilitation therapies. Dr. Keener is going to share information with us today on the latest advances in Parkinson's medications. Thank you, Dr. Keener.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today, and I personally enjoy the stretch breaks as well. So I think we can all benefit from that movement. So today I'll be talking to you all about medications for Parkinson's disease and some of the newer medications that we have available and some of those that are on the horizon. So let's go ahead and get started. So I first want to start by putting the pharmacologic or medication therapy in context. So when we're treating patients with Parkinson's disease, we want to keep in mind that our treatment approach is really interdisciplinary and multifactorial. So in addition to medications, we also have very important non-pharmacologic treatments. You're going to hear a little bit later today about the importance of lifestyle interventions such as diet and exercise for Parkinson's disease. We also have surgical treatment options, which I'll mention only very briefly. And in parentheses there, disease-modifying therapies, really promising research on the horizon, hopeful for new treatments that will change the course of Parkinson's disease. And finally, we want to put all of this in the context of the individual person who we're treating. So those individual considerations play a role in our treatment approach and in the different options that we might explore. So sometimes patients with Parkinson's disease can feel like I'm taking too much medication, and I certainly understand that. Managing Parkinson's disease does take a lot of medication. We often end up prescribing a cocktail of medications to address different symptoms. Medications often have to be taken multiple times per day. But I want to try to put a positive spin on that, in that, we are fortunate to have so many options to help manage Parkinson's disease. And there are more and more new options being introduced each year. And medications are necessary to address both motor and non-motor symptoms of the disease to improve quality of life. And that's really the bottom line. So as we know, Parkinson's disease is a gradually progressive disorder. So in early Parkinson's disease, we want to think about when should we start medication, which medication should we start. As the disease progresses, people may encounter what we call motor fluctuations with wearing off or dyskinesias, and different considerations for medical therapy and even surgical therapies may enter the conversation at that point. When we're talking about starting medications for Parkinson's disease, there are several different options, and the goal is to tailor the treatment to each individual patient, taking into account their particular symptoms, their age, their other medical issues, perhaps even the cost of certain medications that can be somewhat expensive. And so all of this really is determined by the individual patient. As we know, Parkinson's disease and the motor symptoms in particular are due to the loss of a chemical in the brain called dopamine. So most of our pharmacologic treatment options are aimed at boosting or enhancing dopamine in the brain. The gold standard of treatment and really our best medication for motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease remains levodopa. Levodopa is a direct precursor to dopamine. It's often given in combination with another medication called carbidopa, which blocks the peripheral metabolism of levodopa. And this is widely known by the old brand name for this medication, Sinemet, which is the combination of carbidopa and levodopa. Levodopa does come in multiple formulations. We have immediate release, extended release forms of the medication. We have a continuous gel that can be delivered through a tube. And there are other formulations as well that are on the horizon that I'll talk about a little bit later in this section of the presentation. One concern that people often have with levodopa is that over the long term, it may lead to dyskinesias and motor fluctuations. Now, in the first 5 years of the disease, this is relatively low and the impact of dyskinesias is relatively minimal. And so this medication does still remain a very good initial choice for treating symptoms in Parkinson's disease and is really the mainstay of our therapy in advanced Parkinson's disease. The other common initial treatment option in Parkinson's disease are the dopamine agonists, and there are several different medications in this class listed there. Many of them come in extended release once daily formulations, which can be advantageous. These medications are also used to treat restless leg syndrome, so you may recognize them from that context as well. These medications, however, have a much higher incidence of side effects compared to levodopa, particularly as people get older. And so we really want to keep the side effect profile in mind when considering this medication. And the goal is to start at the lowest dose and titrate up slowly to the minimum dose necessary to alleviate symptoms. These medications have a somewhat unique side effect of something we call impulse control disorder. And these are sort of uncontrollable urges to engage in often pleasurable activities or pleasure-seeking behaviors. Can take the form of gambling, shopping, hypersexuality, overeating, or hobbyism. So it's really important to discuss these side effects with your physician and monitor for them over time, as they can occur at any point during the course of treatment and would necessitate decreasing or discontinuing the medication. There are a couple of other classes of medication that we often use in earlier Parkinson's disease, and these are the MAOB inhibitors and COMT inhibitors. These two medications work at different steps in the breakdown of dopamine, either in the periphery or in the brain centrally. and can be used as adjunctive treatments to levodopa. The MAO-B inhibitors can also be used as monotherapy with very mild impact on motor symptoms in early Parkinson's disease. So what's new in these medications? Well, just 2 weeks ago, actually, the American Academy of Neurology, with endorsement from the Parkinson's Foundation, published new guidelines about initiating treatment in early Parkinson's disease. They performed an extensive review of the available medical literature, updating the prior guideline, which was from 2002, I believe. And they concluded that levodopa really is our best medication for treating the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. The risk of developing dyskinesias is low within the first 5 years. There is no advantage of using controlled or extended release formulations in early Parkinson's disease. They also emphasize the importance of monitoring for potential side effects of dopamine agonists, particularly excessive sleepiness, hallucinations, or impulse control disorders. And finally, they concluded that the bottom line is we need to counsel patients about the pros and cons of each of these treatment options and tailor treatment to the individual. So this guideline was just published recently and really brings the literature up to date in initiating treatment in Parkinson's disease. Over time, however, that therapeutic window narrows as disease progression occurs. And so as patients progress in their disease, they may find that they're needing to take medications more frequently to control their motor symptoms, or that they're developing excessive involuntary movements or dyskinesias in response to their medications. So at this stage of disease, we have some strategies that we can employ with the goal of smoothing out that dopamine delivery to avoid those involuntary excess movements and to avoid the wearing off that might occur between doses. We can increase the frequency of medications. We could add on adjunctive therapies to enhance or prolong the effect of levodopa. And we can also add a medication called amantadine to address dyskinesias, those involuntary movements. And we now have many newer options in this domain to try to address this goal of smoothing out dopamine delivery to minimize fluctuations. Since 2014, we have 16 new medications approved by the FDA for Parkinson's disease. And this timeline here just highlights in recent years the number of medications that have been approved and come to the clinic for us to help address these symptoms. So we'll review a few of the more commonly used ones and the newer ones next. So the first one I want to mention is the extended release carbidopa-levodopa capsules known under the brand name Rytary. So this is one of the newer formulations of levodopa. These capsules contain beads of the medication that are designed to release more smoothly. In clinical trials, this formulation showed a reduction in off time and a reduction in dyskinesias. In our clinical experience, we find that sometimes the dose conversion from other levodopa formulations can be tricky and require a little bit of fine-tuning and adjustment in initial stages. And for patients who are taking their carbidopa-levodopa very frequently, they may still require very frequent dosing, even with this extended release capsule up to 5 times per day. I will highlight here that one of the newer medications in the pipeline for Parkinson's disease is by the same company that developed Rytary, sort of aiming to develop an even better capsule formulation of carbidopa-levodopa with an even longer half-life. So stay tuned for that. Another newer formulation of carbidopa-levodopa is the intestinal gel known as Duopa. This is delivered through a small tube inserted through the skin into the stomach and small intestine. And then this medication is pumped in continuously through an external pump that you wear. You can see in this graph here from one of the clinical trials that this delivery system also helps to decrease off time and increase on time without troublesome dyskinesias. The main concerns with this therapy, however, are complications associated with the tube, as well as a higher incidence of peripheral neuropathy in the clinical trials. There is a newer class of medication that has also come on the block recently, and this is istradefylline, known under the brand name Nurians. So this medication was based on the observation that caffeine can decrease the risk of Parkinson's disease. So caffeine is an adenosine agonist, and this medication blocks the adenosine A2A receptor and is thought to, through that mechanism, modulate dopamine activity. So this medication we can add on to levodopa to help address wearing off, with the caveat that it can enhance dyskinesias. It is a once per day dosed medication. So another new kid on the block with a novel mechanism of action. Finally, in recent years, we also have two new, what I'll call rescue treatments for sudden or severe off periods that can occur in Parkinson's disease. This includes the levodopa inhaler known as Inbrija, as well as sublingual apomorphine, which is a dopamine agonist known as Kinmobi. So these medications can be used multiple times per day and are intended to rescue severe off symptoms. They act very quickly to improve motor symptom control. They do have some side effects, but very novel methods of delivery of medication. So inhaler and sublingual dissolving strip. If patients are developing difficult to control motor fluctuations and dyskinesias, or if you have tremor dominant Parkinson's disease with a very severe tremor that's refractory to medications, then this is when we may consider surgical treatments for Parkinson's disease, namely deep brain stimulation. I won't go into this treatment in detail here, but just to highlight that DBS really is intended to smooth out those motor fluctuations, and a good response to levodopa can predict a good response to DBS. This therapy is really most helpful for patients whose motor symptoms are the main cause of their disability. We really want to select patients who have an absence of cognitive impairment or significant psychiatric symptoms, as DBS can sometimes exacerbate those issues. And the goal of DBS is to increase the time spent in your best on medication state without dyskinesias. It does not alter the disease progression and does not eliminate the need for medications, though you may be able to reduce your medications with DBS. In recent years, we have several new sort of advances in the hardware and the software of DBS programming that will continue to move this therapy forward as we develop better understanding of how this therapy impacts the brain and better ways of delivering the stimulation to improve symptoms. In the pipeline, we have several new treatments for motor symptoms. So in development is a new dopamine agonist, a D1, D5 receptor partial agonist, aimed to have good motor symptom relief without hopefully encountering some of the side effects that we have with our current dopamine agonists. I mentioned the apomorphine sublingual film, the Kinmobi, also probably on the horizon for FDA approval very soon and already available in Europe, is a subcutaneous apomorphine continuous infusion pump. There are also new methods of levodopa delivery being developed and improved pharmacokinetics. This includes a continuous subcutaneous levodopa pump, which two companies are developing currently. New pills, one interesting one is what's called the accordion pill, aimed to have better pharmacokinetics delivering the medication. I mentioned the same company that's developed Rytary is developing a new and improved version of a long-acting capsule. And finally, there are even gene therapies in developed to enhance dopamine production in the brain. This presentation would not be complete if I didn't take a little bit of time to address the other symptoms of Parkinson's disease. For anyone living with PD or with somebody who has PD, we know that it is a multi-system disease, and includes more than just the motor symptoms. Non-motor symptoms can include sleep difficulties, anosmia, loss of your sense of smell, changes in mood, changes in cognition, which Dr. Johnson just highlighted, autonomic problems, including constipation, urinary symptoms, orthostatic hypotension, and even sensory and pain syndromes. As the disease progresses, not only do we have the complications of the motor symptoms, but we also have a progression in the non-motor symptoms you can see here. And so we want to be mindful of addressing these non-motor symptoms. Many of them even predate the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease in what some are calling prodromal Parkinson's disease. And so it's really important to discuss these symptoms and address these symptoms separately. Non-motor symptoms contribute significantly to the quality of life in Parkinson's disease. We sometimes refer to this problem as the tip of the iceberg problem, where what you see above the water are those motor symptoms, stiffness, slowness, tremor. But what's underneath the water is a large burden of non-motor symptoms. These are associated with increased morbidity and nursing home placement. These often predate the motor symptoms, as I mentioned, sometimes by decades. And in a recent study, they found that the average patient with Parkinson's disease experiences 7 to 11 non-motor symptoms. Everybody is different in terms of what motor symptoms and non-motor symptoms they might experience, but over time, the prevalence of these symptoms increases. So when we're addressing treatment of non-motor symptoms, we address these really individually. So for sleep difficulties, we have medications that might help address insomnia. We have medications to address a very specific sleep disorder in Parkinson's known as REM sleep behavior disorder, which is acting out of dreams. Melatonin is our first-line therapy for that and can be effective and well tolerated. For mood changes, we often rely on psychotherapy in conjunction with medications like antidepressants that can be helpful. People often ask if there's any one specific antidepressant for Parkinson's disease, and that unfortunately is not the case. So we treat this symptom with SSRIs just like we would treat depression or anxiety, for example, in somebody without Parkinson's disease. Cognitive changes can also occur as Parkinson's disease progresses, and Dr. Johnson just mentioned that we do have some medications for that, in addition to the benefits of behavioral adjustments and even exercise, which has been shown to improve thinking in Parkinson's disease. For autonomic problems, such as constipation and urinary dysfunction, we make a lot of emphasis on diet and staying adequately hydrated. That can also help with low blood pressure that can occur in Parkinson's disease. We also have medications to help with constipation, to help with urinary frequency or urgency that can improve these symptoms as well. And I also want to highlight here the importance of often physical or occupational therapists in helping our patients improve not only their movement, but also some of these non-motor symptoms of the disease through a tailored exercise program. So what's in the pipeline for non-motor symptoms? So we have really some unmet needs in this area, including medications developed specifically for Parkinson's related cognitive impairment, medications or treatments for fatigue, which is a very prominent symptom, often with different contributing factors, but very difficult to treat, and also medications for autonomic dysfunction. So we can use medications to support the blood pressure, for example, in people who have orthostatic hypotension. But the medications that we have certainly can be improved upon, and this is an area of very active development. So I just want to leave you with the sense that there's a lot of work going on to address these unmet areas, particularly in addressing non-motor symptoms of the disease. I'll just wrap up here by saying that individualized care for Parkinson's disease is essential. Everyone with Parkinson's disease experiences unique symptoms, both motor and non-motor. The medical management is just one piece of the puzzle. And really effective management involves addressing someone's well-being as a whole, taking into account medical and non-medical therapies. And finally, each person responds best to their own individualized regimen of exercise, medications, daily routines, and other therapies. So tailoring treatment to the individual is really the key to success. I'll go ahead and stop here and take a few questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keener. We've got a couple of questions, so I'm going to jump right in. Donna asks, why do the manufacturers of Cinnamon not make a quarter-sized pill? I heard they are working on one pill that will be scored in fourths rather than just halves, but Cinnamon disintegrates when you break it. I frequently chew a quarter of a 25-100 Cinnamon pill as a rescue to come up faster. And I want to let the group know Dr. Szumski actually posted a link to a product which I didn't want to click on quite yet because I thought it might take me away, but I think it's a product that helps you split your pills, and that's below in the chat. So check that out. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, thank you, Dr. Szumski. But yes, pill cutters can be helpful, but you're right. Getting a quarter tablet of Cinnamon almost always results in the whole tablet sort of crumbling. People have also developed recipes for liquid Cinnamon, sort of crushing pills and mixing them in water in a certain ratio to sort of microdose your Cinnamon. But you're right. Being able to more fine-tune the dose of levodopa certainly is a challenge, and something that hopefully these newer therapies will enable us to do more easily.
Thank you. Question from Lisa K. My father has severe orthostatic hypotension and can't even sit on the edge of the bed without passing out. Can you give any suggestions for getting his venous system tone improved?
Yeah, so orthostatic hypotension is a very challenging symptom in Parkinson's disease, in part because the disease itself can cause this symptom, but our medications for treating motor symptoms can also exacerbate it. We first start with sort of conservative therapy. So we want to make sure that we're staying well hydrated, eating plenty of salt, even adding extra salt to the diet to really help your body hold on to that water. Sometimes compression stockings or even abdominal compression can help keep that blood going up to the brain rather than having it pool in the extremities. Sleeping with the head of the bed elevated at night can also help prevent the normal sort of loss of fluids that happens in your body overnight. But if those conservative measures are not adequate to address the symptoms, then we do have a few medication options, including medications that boost the blood pressure that we can take to help with that problem. I mentioned, however, that this is one area where there's a lot of ongoing research to develop new medical treatments for this issue because our medication treatments are limited in their benefit.
Okay, great. Alice says, wow. So I guess she's really enjoying your presentation. Lori asks, how does the add-on drug with caffeine action work with insomnia?
Yeah, so that medication, the istradefylline, is taken once a day in the morning. It can potentially exacerbate insomnia, though I personally have not seen that side effect when using this medication. But you're right, you want to keep that in mind. I certainly wouldn't recommend taking it close to bedtime, rather dosing it in the morning.
Great. Maria asks, is there such a thing as taking too much medication or taking doses too frequently? Can the amount of medication taken in a day fluctuate, or should it be consistent every day?
I'll address the second part of that question first, actually. So while you can tailor your dosing to some extent, day to day, depending on your needs, it really is best to try to adhere to a pretty standard and regimented dosing regimen. And the reason for that is because we know that erratic or variable dosing can sometimes predispose people to developing motor fluctuations or dyskinesias. And so while there might be a little bit of variability from day to day, developing a good routine can help you manage your motor symptoms. With regards to the first part of that question about taking too much medication, this sometimes can happen. People sometimes find that they develop an emotional response, a euphoria with medications that can sometimes lead them to craving and wanting more than they might truly need to address their symptoms. This is something that we call dopamine dysregulation syndrome, and is certainly not extremely common, but when it does occur, it can be difficult to treat, because we know that dopamine not only plays a role in your movement, but also plays a role in your cognition and your emotional state. And so we want to avoid escalating doses unnecessarily in a way that might be sort of harmful in the long run.
Okay, and we have time for one more question. Donna asks, can Dr. Keener update us on any progress for finding a biomarker for PD?
Oh, that I think could be a whole nother 30-minute talk in itself, but people are looking at serum, so blood biomarkers, CSF, so spinal fluid biomarkers. People are also looking at other sort of markers of the disease, including like REM sleep behavior disorder, smell tests, things that might help us identify even prodromal Parkinson's disease as biomarkers. There's also currently on the market a skin biopsy that can be performed looking for alpha-synuclein deposits in the skin as a marker of Parkinson's disease. So some of these may be helpful for diagnosis. I think the thing that we have not really yet found is a biomarker that can help us track progression of disease over time. And so a lot of work in, body fluid biomarkers, neuroimaging biomarkers, and sort of other perhaps disease markers, I would say, that can help us identify patients earlier and then also monitor them over time.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Keener. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. And to our group out here that I know it can be frustrating to type a question that's important to you and not get it addressed. We are limited on time, but what I promise we will do is we'll take all of these questions and we'll send them out to our speakers. And once we get them answered, we'll email everybody so everyone can see their questions. And, because I know a lot of people have the same issues. So we'll get you your answers, but because of time, we're going to continue moving along. Now let's move our bodies a bit. Kathleen Ross-Allee is going to lead us through some yoga for Parkinson's. I'm so excited to see this. Kathleen is a certified yoga therapist and fitness trainer. There she is, with more than 30 years of experience as a health and wellness expert. She has developed yoga therapy and exercise programs throughout Southern California and has been teaching a gentle yoga therapy for Parkinson's class for many years. Thank you, Kathleen, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's nice to see you again. I think the last time I saw you was downtown LA, and it's a little easier out of my home. I just welcome to my Zoom room, which used to be my living room. Got rid of the couch, everybody. I'm sure you all are experiencing the same type of thing. So thank you for the wonderful welcome, and I'm grateful to the Parkinson's community of Los Angeles for having this presentation. So I know you've all been staring at your computers, and this is probably what we've all been doing. So I'd like you to just take a moment, and some of you might be running to the bathroom. I get it. It's an hour and 15 in, so feel free. I'll be here for a Zoom breakout room later, so we can talk then if you need to go run and get some water, whatever you need. But for those of you who are willing to stay with me, just take a moment to make yourself comfortable. Move your face away from the computer, because I'm going to explain everything pretty easily. And just take a moment to either softly gaze or close your eyes. And notice how you're feeling physically in this moment. Starting at the crown of the head, just bring a little bit of awareness to the muscles of the face, particularly the jaw, your neck, shoulders. Notice your arms, your hands. Bring your awareness to the upper chest and the upper back. Down to the spine, observing maybe you're on the couch, maybe you're lying in bed. Observe the legs, the knees, down through the shins and the calves, the feet, soles of the feet, the toes. And then once you've checked in there, notice how you're feeling emotionally in this moment, listening to all this information. What kind of day is it for you? Remember, there's no right or wrong way to feel. Notice your energy on a Saturday morning. And notice the thoughts that are going around in your head, if they're typical, if they're different today. And turn your attention to your breathing. And begin to notice the breath as it comes in and the breath as it goes out. Notice if you feel it around the nose or the mouth. Notice if you feel any movement in the chest or the belly. Watching the breath in, watching the breath out. I know I am breathing in. I know I am breathing out. And then just bring your awareness back to the physical body. Let's start at the feet, building our strength by pressing our feet into the floor if possible, lengthening the spine up towards the ceiling. And if your eyes are closed, gently blink them open and bring your awareness back into your space. And just kind of check in. Notice what's going on. Do you feel a little different than when we first began? So this is a really important practice to check in every so often with yourself during the day. Now we're going to lower our chin towards our chest, just very gently. Don't push. And then as you inhale, raise the chin up towards the ceiling. So it's a vertical motion. Exhale, lowering the chin down, not pushing the edges. Brings us into the present. Good. And then find your way back to neutral, gazing straight ahead. And I'm going to use a different word. Normally we say turn your head, but when we say that, it's a little harsh and we go, what? And then we go, ah. So let's swivel our head to the right very slowly, bringing awareness to that movement. And then inhale back through the middle. And then exhale, swivel to the left. And again, back to the center. That's the inhale. Exhale to one side, whichever side you like. And as you do this, notice if one direction is easier than the other. And just acknowledge that we're asymmetrical, so that's okay. We just want to notice. It's how we hold ourselves sometimes. It's different for each person. Good. And then bringing your head back to the center, let's gently shrug our shoulders up towards our ears and then slowly release them down. Now I'm going to scoot back to my other chair so you can see a little bit more of my body. As we shrug up, slowly lower down. Don't let them plop, and keep your hands on your thighs so there's less strain on the neck and shoulders. Inhale, raise them up. And exhale, lower them down. Let's try one more of those. If you're hearing noises, that's okay. Little clunks and clicks and things. Good. Now slide your hands to your kneecaps. Yeah, I'm going to do this sideways so you can see. We're going to gently tuck our chin in and push the back a little bit. Just don't round too much. And then as you inhale, slide your hands up your thighs and lift your chest. And then exhale, slide your hands to your knees, gently rounding the back a little bit. And then as you inhale, sliding the hands up, sitting up tall. And one more time. Yeah, we're just stretching it out. Gentle, bringing that awareness. Good. Now, taking your hands back to your knees, slide your left hand up your thigh and open your body, turn your body a little bit to the left. And then as you inhale, face forward. So get a little lateral movement here. Exhale, slide the right hand up, turn to the right. And inhale, face forward. Good. Let's do a few more of those. And if you're getting confused by the breath, then all I'm going to say is just breathe. As long as you're breathing, these movements are safe. We don't want to hold our breath as we're moving. We want to keep that connection. The breath is so important for our healing. Nice deep breaths that feel good to you. The next time you come forward, pause. If you're noticing a little lightheadedness, then just pause for a moment and go back to very easy breaths. Sometimes that can happen if we haven't been breathing deeply, so don't worry. Bring the palms of your hands together now in front of your chest. And as you inhale, chest opener, you're going to open the arms out to the sides a little bit. And then exhale, bring your hands back together. I'm going to show you this sideways. Inhale, open. So even if you're just here, that's enough. You can go further, but if it bothers your back, don't push it. Bring your hands right back together. Good. And one more time. Opening and closing. Good. Now resting your hands on your thighs. If you're able to, come to the front edge of your chair. Now, if you have a roller chair, please be careful with this because sometimes the chair can kind of move out of our way, right? But I'm going to ask you to just kind of lift your legs a little bit if you're able to. Yeah, just march it out a little, get a little circulation. If that's not possible for you, guess what? You can just lift your heels up and lower them down. And again, I'll show that sideways. If you lift them and you get a cramp, go ahead and rub it out. So don't wait for me. Inhale up and down or marching just a little bit, getting that movement. Yeah, good. Once you've done that, bring your feet together and your knees together. We're going to do our heel toe. So this is going to help warm up those hips. So take your heels out, you get a little pigeon toed, and then take the toes out. Yeah. Stop here for a moment, because if you're already tight, don't go any further. If you're not, take the heels out again and maybe the knees again. Yeah. Pause here. Whichever place you are, go ahead and rub that inner thigh. Yeah, get it warmed up just a little bit. And then walk your feet back together. Take your time. And plant your feet hip width apart again. Good. Drawing the belly button in towards the spine. Just take a moment here and start to notice if anything's starting to shift for you. Anything starting to feel different. Good. Now we're going to take, I know that it's yoga, so we're going to take a warrior one for everyone. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but let's just do one warrior one together. You're going to stretch your right leg out onto the floor, placing the heel down and the toes are up. Bringing your arms into cactus. We've already warmed up for that. So now we're in our warrior one. Draw the belly in, lift the chest, breathe in and out through the nose if you can. Good. And then release the arms down and bring the right foot back in. Now stretch the left leg out. Heel on the ground. This is going to keep us safe. Since I can't see everybody, I want to do a safe practice. Bring the palms of the hands straight ahead into our cactus pose. So now we're in our warrior one again. Good. And then release the arms and bring the foot back in. downward dog. I know you've seen the pictures, but we're doing chair dog today. So place your heels on the floor in front of you. I'll go sideways so you can see how far my legs are out. Not so far, right? That's the downward dog leg part. Then bring your arms back into cactus. And I don't know how old everybody is in this room, but we're going to raise the roof. So bend the hand back and push the hands up towards the ceiling. Now we've got our downward dog. Take a deep breath here. Open up that body. Good. The feet back in. Rest your hands on your lap. And we're going to take a little vocalization because I know you've been listening to everybody and we want to have our voice. So we're going to do the ha, ha, ho, ho, he one. Okay. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to say something and you're going to say it back to me. Even though I can't hear you, your neighbors might. So we're going to take a nice deep inhale and we're going to go ha, ha, ha. So I'm listening. Good. Now after ha, we're going to go ho. Ho, ho, ho. Then we're going to go he. We have to be fair. She. Now you are going to yell at the computer. You're going to go, hey. I want to hear it. Let's do it again. Hey. And you're going to say, hey, Kathleen. Hey, Kathleen. Now you're going to say your own name. And I'm going to like look at him. I'm going to say, hey, Patrick. So say your own name. Good. Now, everybody. Ha, 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 ha. He. She. Come on. Smile. Let's do it. Ha, 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 ha. Ho, 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 ho. He. She. Ooh. All right. So now we've awakened everything. Plant your hands on your thighs again. Plant your feet into the floor. Allow your eyes to softly gaze or close. And just take a moment. Notice if you feel any different than when we first began. Notice crown of the head, jaw, shoulders, arms, chest, upper back, down to the belly, the hips, the thighs, the knees. Do you feel a little different emotionally? Is your energy different? Are your thoughts a little different? Are they clearer? Are they more specific? Are they more relaxed? And then take a moment to breathe. I know I am breathing in. I know I am breathing out. And then place one hand on your belly, one hand on your heart, taking a moment to be grateful for all that we have, all that we give, and all that we are. Thank you, everyone, for letting me into your room today, and I'll see some of you later in a Zoom breakout room. Thanks, Patrick. I can't hear you, Patrick.
Hey, Patrick, we lost your microphone.
I'll stay here until Patrick
Is
gets
this,
back. There he is.
Okay, I have a couple. I think my battery went out. Okay, so you have me smiling ear to ear. Hi, I was loving it. That's exactly what we needed. So thank you so much, Kathleen. Fabulous.
You're welcome.
You know, Kathleen's going to be in the breakout section at the end. For those of you who joined late, we've got something really special for you. We're going to end this, wrap this. You'll check your email. You'll have a link. You'll pop it in, and it'll bring you into a room where we have different breakout rooms, and you can visit, and Kathleen will be there. So thanks for joining us and making this a special day, Kathleen. We really appreciate you. Okay. Now, remember, if you're enjoying this program, please consider visiting PCLA.org and making a donation. We're a nonprofit and it's tax deductible. Our next presentation is focused on two big topics important for everyone's health: sleep and exercise. Dr. Xenos Mason is a movement disorder specialist and neurosurgeon at the University of Southern California. Among his clinical and research interests are in the use of development and deep brain stimulation as a treatment for movement disorders. Dr. Mason, I'm thanking you for talking with us today, and also thank you for being on our advisory board. We really appreciate you. And thanks for talking about this important topic.
Well, thank you. I mean, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. It's an honor to be on the advisory board. It's an honor to speak to everybody today, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I will say that you've given me it would be maybe 2 extra years of residency. So I'm not a surgeon. I am just a lowly neurologist, but a movement disorder specialist. And I do work closely with surgeons, focusing on deep brain stimulation at USC. Honored to be among the community in whatever capacity, surgeon, neurologist. So I will just share my screen here to start the presentation. Can everybody see this?
Yeah, that's up, but I think you need to put it in full screen mode.
There you are.
Okay.
Exercise is a very big and important topic, and so I'd like to focus on exercise today, and we're going to have probably about 20 minutes of the talk be on exercise, and then a little bit on sleep. And the reason, well, first I'll get into disclosures. I don't have any industry ties related to the content of this talk. I have no financial or other conflicts of interest regarding the content of the talk. The reason I'm talking about these two topics together is because they're two of the more easily modified behaviors, things that you can do on your own, even apart from guidance from your doctor, medical treatment, that can change the course of Parkinson's disease and change the experience you have of Parkinson's disease and the role it has in your life. Sleep and exercise, along with diet, are probably the most important ways that you can do that. They're also interactive in that exercise improves the quality of sleep, and getting a good quality sleep improves daytime fatigue, which allows you to exercise. And so they're important topics to talk about together in that sense. And aside from movement problems, sleep and exercise are the two things I probably spend most time talking about with my patients in the clinic. And there are, of course, other non-movement related symptoms of Parkinson's disease, which we discuss very frequently. But overall, I think these are probably the two most brought up, most important topics. Before we talk about exercise, it's important to say two things. One is that your primary care doctor, your neurologist, movement disorder specialist, physical therapist, whoever you have sort of involved in your care, can advise you on the types of exercise that would be safe for you, and whether assistive devices like a walker or a cane or some sort of balance device would be helpful to you as you sort of launch into an exercise program, if that is the goal of yours. And the second thing to talk about is that other medical conditions, other chronic illnesses, can influence the way that you exercise and the safety of specific exercises. It's rare that a chronic illness is going to not allow you to exercise at all. But if you've recently had a heart attack, for example, there's a specific regimen of rehabilitation that you would want to take on. And so if you have chronic illnesses, heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease, these are the things that you can talk to your primary care doctor or specialist about. Again, to advise the exercise program. It's almost never a reason not to exercise. There are multiple lines of evidence for benefit of exercise, and I want to just talk about them briefly. And philosophically, my approach to this topic is teach a man to fish rather than give them a fish. I would like you to understand why we feel so strongly about exercise, because you will find that when you go and see a neurologist or a movement disorder specialist, they will almost undoubtedly talk to you about the importance of exercise in Parkinson's disease, and they'll hammer it again and again. And so I do want you to have some context about why we feel so strongly and why we think about the topic as we do. Multiple lines of evidence all converge on the idea that exercise is beneficial for Parkinson's disease. And all the sort of experimental methods that we can use as scientists and clinicians, they all agree that exercise is beneficial. So we can see data from animal studies in mice and rats, for example, that exercise improves the performance of these animals in tasks requiring cognition and movement. And it also results in less loss of dopamine in those animal models of Parkinson's disease. There are also population-based studies to show that people who exercise do better with Parkinson's disease, and they also have a lower risk of developing Parkinson's disease at a population level. And then for an individual, engaging in exercise results in improvement in the disease, and we'll talk about the various ways that that can happen. But it also results in changes in the amount of dopamine in the brain and the ability of the brain to compensate for changes in dopamine that occur in Parkinson's disease. And just to remind you, dopamine is that important chemical for movement that is lost in Parkinson's disease. And there's changes in the brain network functions as well. All of these lines converge to suggest that exercise is good, and especially good for Parkinson's. So you know this, and this might be obvious, but there's 4 different categories of exercise that we all want to focus on for a balanced overall physical fitness regimen. Cardiovascular exercise is getting your heart rate up and your breathing up, brisk walk, jogging, swimming. Strength training is supporting the strength of your muscles, and that is accomplished by resistance training, which can be done with body weight or can be done with resistance bands, or in some cases with actual weights. Flexibility and balance are the other 2 categories, which people sometimes forget about, but yoga practices target both of those. Neuroboxing is a way to really improve balance, as something that a lot of patients with Parkinson's enjoy. Many exercises are going to incorporate all 4 of these categories, but you do want to hit all 4 of them for a balanced exercise regimen. And now I want to take a step back and talk about the big picture, because I'm gonna talk about 2 categories of exercise that can be useful for Parkinson's disease. But I want to talk about the philosophical basis of that separation and why it's occurred, so that again you understand sort of where the field has been and where we're at now. So, and I have to give credit to Dr. Giselle Petzinger, who's an exercise researcher and a Parkinson's disease specialist with me at the University of Southern California, and has been working in exercise for many years, so understands this field very well. The first research for Parkinson's disease surrounding exercise was really focused on symptoms that we couldn't treat very well with medications. So that is often, for example, gait difficulty or balance problems, something that emerges more often as the disease progresses after it's been present for many years, but something that it's very difficult to treat with the medications which we often start for Parkinson's disease, Sinemet, for example, carbidopa-levodopa. So with that philosophy of targeting specific symptoms, the early research really focused on this idea of skill training, using specific tasks to improve the performance of specific skills. And some of the early research found, and we'll go over this a little bit, that skill training was really useful for specific symptoms in Parkinson's disease. Then, as we progress a number of years, this other idea comes into the fold, that aerobic exercise and cardiovascular fitness can improve symptoms of other neurological disorders that involve thinking. So specifically the dementias, Alzheimer's disease, cognitive disorders, cognitive impairment. And this idea of aerobic exercise being beneficial then got brought into the Parkinson's disease research field. And the question and the experiments were, could we improve thinking and mood by encouraging patients with Parkinson's disease to exercise aerobically? And the answer to that was also yes. And then most recently, the field sort of got into a bit of a crossover. Can we use aerobic exercise and physical activity to improve skills and other tasks in Parkinson's disease? So does encouraging aerobic exercise and physical activity in a person with Parkinson's disease improve their movement function, their motor function? And indeed, some of the more recent studies have shown that that kind of crossover strategy was also useful. But that's where the field has sort of been, and the reason that we think about these 2 things a little bit separately. Some of the more recent studies have combined them to suggest that any form of exercise is really beneficial as a whole. But to give you some context, these two philosophies or two strategies came in a little bit separately and then were combined. So what is skill training? Well, it's very simple. This is just practice. Practice makes perfect. This is the case for gross motor tasks like dancing or walking in a ballet dancer. It's also the case for fine motor tasks like knife skills in the kitchen. Anybody who's seen a beginner in the kitchen knows that it can make you a little squeamish to see how they use the knife. And not only is it clumsy, but it's not as safe. Practicing in one task doesn't necessarily mean that other tasks will improve. So a chef is not going to be a good ballet dancer, and a good dancer may cut themselves in the kitchen. By the same logic, working on your gait may not allow you to use your hands more easily. Working on your balance may not allow you to feel that your legs are moving more fluidly, but working on specific tasks and specific symptoms will improve those. The other important concept in skill training is that it's progressive. So the idea here is that when you're conducting some sort of program in skill training, you want it to be continuously challenging. So if you start, for example, with some basic activities, if you're not somebody who can walk very easily at all, using physical devices like a handrail in a physical therapy office to support yourself, you might then move to a walker and then progress to more complicated tasks. And by the same token, if you're working on your gait and balance, you may start just by standing on one foot, then moving on to ways to destabilize the body in various ways and make it more and more difficult over time, so that by the time you finish with the program, the tasks that are difficult now, sorry, you probably hear my dog, the tasks that are difficult now, but that you can accomplish might have been impossible at the beginning of the program. And I know that I said that most of those tasks do not cross over, but to some degree there is. So even though balance and walking are different processes in the body, they do involve each other. And so working on your balance can improve your gait. Working on your gait can improve your balance. So sometimes doing a specific activity or a specific exercise kind of class can target multiple skills at the same time. And I want to just give an example of this. This is a wonderful video that was sent to me by a patient. I'm just going to turn the volume down. You don't really need to hear it, but what you can see is that he's working on this stick tapping, kind of dueling fencing. And I'm going to skip ahead in the video a little bit. You can see that as he learns the task, he's able to make it a little more complex. And he's not just using his arms here. You can also see that he's stepping to the side with both feet. He's transferring his weight. He's pivoting at the hips and shoulders. And so this is a really dynamic activity. It's not just engaging his mind and making sure that he can, tap the right stick and make the right kinds of volleys. But it's also engaging the body and training the arms to move well. It's training those dynamic balance reflexes, and it's also improving aspects of his gait. So you can see here, skip to the end. These sorts of exercise classes, for example, neuroboxing, really do incorporate different tasks into the same activity, and that's why they're so beneficial. But though they're also just very fun for people. I want to focus down on one particular symptom that you can approach with this kind of skill training, and that is freezing of gait. So this is a symptom that people experience often later in Parkinson's disease after they've had the disease for many years. The idea is that the normal automatic circuitry in the brain and in the spinal cord that facilitates gait becomes impaired. So this is a complex diagram, but I just want to use it to illustrate a couple of points. Here in the normal state, the normal reflexes and circuits are working automatically, and they're not interfered with by any other parts of the brain. And as freezing of gait becomes an issue, parts of the brain that normally don't participate in gait start to participate. And in particular, these areas of the brain that are involved in planning processes And these limbic areas, that's a word for sort of the emotional areas of the brain, become involved in the process of gait. And as the symptoms progress, they start to interfere more and more, so that the circuit becomes overwhelmed and it doesn't operate properly, such that at a certain point, it might be so overwhelmed by these areas of the brain that normally don't participate that it just becomes completely dysfunctional. This is a wonderful poster that has been put together by a Parkinson's disease researcher named Bastian Blom in the Netherlands on the strategies that people take to overcome those dysfunctional circuits in the brain and improve freezing of gait. It's really about tricking the brain back into its natural automatic state so that those normal gait circuits that are automatic and don't need to be thought about can start to participate and activate normally. Some of those are using external cues, like a line on the floor, using internal cues, so a specific thought process, changing the balance requirements or skipping ahead to this number 6, changing the way that the gait or walking is patterned. So it might just be stepping in a certain way or sort of crossing over the midline of the body so that you kind of walk in a crosswise fashion. Different people have different strategies for overcoming freezing. But there's these 7 categories. And if you use your phone to scan this QR code, you can access the poster free. You can also search for his name, Blom, B-L-O-E-M, and freezing of gait poster, and you can download it for free online. There's about 50 different strategies that the many patients he's talked to and studied with freezing of gait have used to overcome. You can use some of those strategies in a structured way to improve that particular symptom through skill training. And this is one study that came out just last year that used an effective regimen of skill training involving strength training and also dynamic balance. And by engaging in this structured program over 12 weeks, a number of patients were able to improve their balance, improve their walking, and the number of falls was also reduced in the group overall. So you can see this idea of challenge and progression in this focused task-based training system. So they're using weights and they're increasing the amount of weight they use over the 12 weeks. They're also changing the challenge of balance. So they might be doing some of these activities on a flat ground at first, but then they're using these devices in a progressive way, foam pads and these balance discs, and then these balls that become more and more challenging over time to force those postural reflexes, those automatic reflexes the body uses to stay upright, to learn and to adapt and improve the person's balance. Now, I want to talk about a few what are called meta-analyses, and I just want to introduce this idea to you very briefly so that if somebody mentions it to you in the future, you might know exactly what it is. When we're studying exercise for Parkinson's disease, or really anything, we're often looking at different levels of evidence. We can look at one patient and the way that they responded to a treatment. That's called a case report. The next level of evidence is to use a randomized controlled trial, putting people in different groups and seeing how they do with different treatments. And when we have a number of randomized trials that have been performed, we can compare those by using something called a meta-analysis. And it's basically looking at all of those trials, which are different, the people who were included, their age, their gender, for example, what exercise was used, or how the study was controlled, or how the statistical comparisons were made. It tries to account for all of those differences. It combines the studies, and it gives you one overall answer that is suggested by a number of different studies. It's kind of assembling a lot of data into a very high-level analysis. So when you hear the term meta-analysis, that's what's being done. It's usually a comparison of multiple randomized controlled trials. Here's one that was done by Freezing of Gait by a world leader in this field that included 50 studies, 3,000 patients. 29 of those studies tested exercises that were specifically designed for freezing of gait, this idea of task-based training. And they found that there was a great improvement in the symptoms, but specifically from those exercises that were targeting the freezing of gait. So no surprise based on what we've talked about already. When you're trying to improve a symptom or train a task, it's really important to use strategies that work on that specific task. But they make the point that people who have freezing of gait should really use these strategies. But patients with Parkinson's disease without freezing or without gait problems, they might just use general exercise strategies at first because it really is a cost time analysis. If you're doing these exercises that are targeted toward freezing, you're going to miss out on your general exercise time. So for most patients, it's okay to engage in a general exercise program. But if freezing of gait becomes a problem and walking and balance become an issue, using those targeted exercises can be more useful. So now I'm going to shift gears, move away from this idea of task-based exercise into aerobic exercise. And then again, like I said, this has been best studied for cognition, thinking, and neurologic disorders that involve changes in thinking, but is now used to study movement and motor function. And aerobic exercise is often tied to this idea of intensity. So moderate to vigorous, these words you sometimes hear about how hard we should be exercising. Exercise is a kind of physical activity, but those two things are different. Physical activity really includes anything that you're doing in your regular life that uses energy. And exercise is a subset of physical activity that is often, it's planned, structured, repetitive. It really is about reaching a certain endpoint and is being done for physical fitness. But gardening, for example, is a physical activity. Walking the dog is a physical activity. All of these do count towards the idea of getting enough physical activity in life. So if we're thinking about moderate to vigorous physical activity, here are the things that you might think about. Light bicycling, badminton, doubles tennis. I think doubles tennis is way harder than this chart would have you believe, but these people think that it's only moderate physical activity, or even cleaning the house. Vigorous physical activity, shoveling snow, jogging, hiking, carrying really heavy loads, carrying bags of groceries up the stairs, for example. All of that counts for your amount of physical activity. The World Health Organization recommends that all adults aged 18 to 64 get at least 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. So that amounts to about 25 to 40 minutes a day. And, again, all of the things you're doing around the house count. Walking the dog, going to the grocery store, carrying those groceries in from the store. They also make the recommendation that older adults do those 150 to 300 minutes, but also add multi-component physical activity emphasizing functional strength and balance. And that's everything that we've been talking about. So here's a meta-analysis that was done in 2006. This is one of the more influential papers in this field. And this graph, basically what you see is each one of these little squares represents the result of an individual trial. And all of these trials fall on this side of the line, which is that exercise is beneficial. And here's the overall result, this diamond here. It's not important to know what the numbers mean, but specifically that all these studies that they looked at have the same result, which was aerobic activity and physical activity were beneficial for Parkinson's disease movement symptoms. And there was also a Cochrane review just a few years ago, which is really the gold standard of our evidence level in medicine, to show the same thing, which is that in 39 trials involving about 2,000 people with Parkinson's disease, exercise improved various features of movement, including walking, freezing, balance, and the UPDRS, which is our physicians' movement disorder specialists' scale of how somebody's movements are doing. So how intense should we exercise to get those benefits for Parkinson's disease? Well, there's been a couple of trials that have been done more recently to show that there's benefit from the higher end of that moderate level. So maybe around 125 beats per minute of your heart rate, or a moderate to high level of exertion in another trial. So what this comes down to is that it should be difficult or impossible to carry on a conversation when you're doing this exercise. And how often? Well, most of the trials have used about 3 times per week, but we can also say that just practically speaking, it's easier to stick with something if you do it every day. So you want to exercise at least 3 times a week, but doing it every day is not going to hurt. It's probably going to make it easier to adhere to an exercise regimen, even if you do it 5 to 10 minutes one day and 20 to 30 another. Just getting some exercise every day is most important. Or physical activity, getting to the grocery store, walking the dog. Anything that you can do to get those 150 to 300 minutes counts. And this is just, I'm going to skip this trial, just this slide to move on to sleep. But this is just a slide to tell you that aerobic exercise, physical activity, also improves those non-movement related symptoms of Parkinson's disease, thinking, mood, and sleep. So the take-home points from this first section, and I'm going to move through sleep pretty quickly because I want to keep us on time. But skill training and physical activity versus aerobic exercise, they have different benefits. Choosing something that you enjoy means you're more likely to stick with it and do it every day. And specific exercise regimens are not really necessary. We talked a lot about skills-based training, but you don't have to do this skills-based training in the physical therapy office to improve your balance. Instead, choose a kind of exercise that you enjoy and that allows you to challenge yourself and progress. So whether it's boxing or another group class or Tai Chi or dancing, anything where you can enjoy it, do it often, and improve over time. You should exercise frequently and hard enough that you can't hold a conversation. You should exercise every day. You should exercise every day. And you should exercise every day. I really can't emphasize this, even if you're just getting some moderate physical activity. But most importantly, try to make changes in your life slowly, try to be consistent, and you will have days and weeks where you fall off the horse. Just forgive yourself for those inconsistencies and start exercising the next week. So moving on to sleep. I'm just going to do this in about 5 minutes because, again, just to keep us on time. Sleep is one of the most common non-movement related problems in Parkinson's disease. And there's lots of different ways that sleep can go awry. Insomnia is very common. That can cause daytime fatigue in about half of people with Parkinson's disease. REM sleep behavior disorder, that enactment or acting out of dreams during sleep, is a very common problem, and as is restless leg syndrome. Obstructive sleep apnea, also more common in patients, people with Parkinson's disease. Many different things contribute to insomnia and Parkinson's. Mood problems and anxiety, which can occur more commonly in Parkinson's disease. Wearing off and slowness can also make it difficult to move in bed at night and contribute to insomnia, as can pain. Medications themselves, restless leg syndrome, and changes in the dream state can also contribute. And there's some activity and apathy related problems. So during the day, if you're less likely to exercise, you're more likely to have a problem sleeping. All of these can happen in Parkinson's disease. The most important is sleep hygiene, and I would refer you to this website from the National Institutes of Aging. The most important concepts in sleep hygiene, these are behavioral changes you can make and habits you can be consistent with to improve your sleep, are using the bedroom just for rest. In most cases, I know that the bedroom is used for other things sometimes, but for the most part, use it for sleep. Don't use it for reading or TV, especially if you're having problems sleeping. Avoiding screens, avoiding naps during the day, going to bed and getting up at the same time. And if urination at night is an issue, stopping your drinking of water after about 5 p.m. can help you with that. There are some non-medical treatments that can be considered for sleep. Specifically, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is very useful for some people, and that can be offered by occupational therapy. This is a way to sort of reroute those anxious processes, that vicious cycle that often occurs, that you worry about sleeping, and so it's harder to sleep. Bright light therapy can be useful. Exercise we spent half an hour talking about, and CPAP for patients with sleep apnea. Deep brain stimulation has been shown to improve sleep, but of course that's only necessary and appropriate for some people with Parkinson's disease. So then there's various medications, and I don't want you to worry about the names, but just to know that there's different strategies to approach these problems and different medications we can use that you can discuss with your movement disorder specialist. We can address underlying issues first. So if anxiety is a problem about sleep or other issues, we can use a specific medicine for anxiety. If dystonia is an issue, we can use medicines for Parkinson's disease like Sinemet or magnesium can be very effective for cramping at night, which causes pain and makes it difficult for some people to sleep. And then medicines to reduce the need to urinate can be useful if behavioral changes are not useful. Sometimes we adjust medications for movement. So moving the dose of certain medicines around can improve sleep because sometimes they cause sleepiness, other times they cause insomnia. And then only at that point would we consider a medicine specifically for insomnia. So Lunesta has been suggested by the movement disorders, by papers in our journals. However, it's a dangerous medicine to consider for people who are above the age of 65. And so generally we go to something softer and easier to tolerate like melatonin, which is very safe at doses of 10 or 12 milligrams. Specific medicines can treat restless leg syndrome. Indeed, the medicines we use to treat Parkinson's disease can be helpful for restless leg syndrome. And melatonin, or a medicine called Klonopin or clonazepam, can be very effective for treating REM sleep behavior disorder or dream enactment problems at night. So I flew through this very quickly, but just to say that there are many sleep problems that are common in Parkinson's disease. The first step is always to start with sleep hygiene. And by searching the National Institutes of Aging, how to get a good rest, you can find the website that gives you specific tips for that. And then cognitive behavioral therapy as a next option, followed by medication treatments. So thank you so much. I'm sorry I went a couple minutes over. And
oh, it's great. This is absolutely wonderful, Dr. Mason. Thank you so much. And I hope all of you out there that were considering starting an exercise program have now the encouragement you need to do so. So we have some questions. My friend Tom asks, I enjoy exercise, but sometimes it results in muscular soreness in my affected leg, especially. Any ideas for dealing with muscle soreness, especially the next day after?
Well, I mean, Patrick, you probably have some ideas about this yourself.
He's heard mine.
I think so. You know, I think that you probably have to change up the way that you're exercising, and it's all about sort of changing the body's ability to adapt to a specific exercise. If you're doing an exercise or an exercise program in a certain way and it's causing soreness, I mean, you're going to have to modify it. And then the other recommendations are just like ice, heat, and an anti-inflammatory medicine like Tylenol or Advil if it's helpful for you. But I think it's the old doc, it hurts to move my arm that way, then stop moving my arm that way advice that you hate to hear.
That's great. Yeah, and Tom, like Dr. Mason said, adding some heat maybe before you exercise and making sure you stretch after, and then the Advil or Tylenol is a great suggestion as well. What about sleep interrupted by tremors?
It's rare that tremors wake people from sleep. Often you wake from sleep for another reason and then have tremors. However, if your tremors are waking you from sleep, and that's something that somebody can confirm, maybe somebody who's in bed with you at night, then using a long-acting form of carbidopa-levodopa or another long-acting medicine for Parkinson's disease can be helpful for that problem.
Your slide on dystonia/muscle cramping showed 2 types of magnesium. Can you please explain? That's from Donna.
Yeah, I flew through that because I was running out of time. Magnesium oxide is the most common form of magnesium that you'll see on the shelves. And this is the cheapest and the easiest to get. At the same time, it's the one that is absorbed least effectively from the gut. And for that reason, it causes the highest amount of gastrointestinal side effects, including cramping and diarrhea. It certainly doesn't do that in all or even most people. Most people can take 200 milligrams, which is usually 1 tablet of magnesium without any issue. But if people are having a problem and they'd like to get that extra magnesium to try to help with the cramping, then at that point, switching to magnesium citrate or magnesium gluconate, which is basically magnesium bound to an amino acid, can be useful. Those are absorbed more easily from the gut. They cause fewer side effects, but they're more expensive.
Okay. Lee asks, leg cramps seem to be a major issue at night. Any thoughts?
Well, I think, Lee, if we haven't covered that question already, why don't you just type in that you want some more information? Because I think magnesium stretching and using a long-acting form of carbidopa-levodopa are the first options for that problem.
Okay, and we've got time for one more question. Is taking CBD for sleep an option?
It's an option. It's not one that I can formally recommend because there haven't been very good studies on this. Anecdotally, I think you'll find that if you talk to any experts in this field, that we have many patients who take CBD for sleep and find it helpful. At the same time, there are many different formulations of CBD, all of which offer different concentrations and purities. So it's hard to make a real recommendation about it. If you want to try it, it's almost certainly not dangerous.
Okay, I'll toss one more question here. I'm 70 and have taken Lunesta for the past 6 years. Should I talk to my doctor about stopping it?
That's a great question. Well, they're all great questions. Lunesta can cause side effects at higher rates in people who are at your age, 70, 75. So you may find that being on this medication in the future begins to affect you in ways it hasn't in the past. If you have no side effects from it, it may be fine to keep taking it now, but it's certainly a good idea to talk to your primary care doctor about maybe transitioning to a different strategy. If you're on a low dose and you're sleeping extremely well, then I would make any changes quite slowly because it's really hard to get off of that medication.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Mason. And again, we'll be going over the questions, and the ones that weren't answered, we'll be getting back to you via email. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you.
Really been so nice to be here. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, everyone. So now is a great time for a break. We had a 10-minute break scheduled, but we're going to shorten that a little bit. Now's a great time to grab a snack and some water, stretch your legs. We didn't have any music planned, which would have been good during this time. So I'm going to actually, on the theme of task-oriented exercise, while you guys can, if you don't want to, I'm just going to do a little task-oriented routine here, which you don't have to participate in, but just so we have something to fill this short break. So I hope everybody is enjoying this presentation as much as I am. It's fabulous, as I knew it would be. So Dr. Mason talked about task-oriented, make sure my volume is up here, task-oriented exercise. Basically, they've done studies that show incorporating activities of daily living and converting that into exercise can really help with the application of the strength gains into moving around throughout the day. So I have a little routine that I'd like us all to do that addresses 3 really important components of the way we move through the day, and it incorporates that into exercise. So I'm going to move my chair back here, and let me preface this that I will be standing and walking a little bit. So if you have balance issues, please be safe or skip this. But Parkinson's can make things that we learn to do without being taught difficult, like getting out of a chair, like getting into a chair, like getting into a car, like putting on a jacket. So we need to break these activities down and figure out the best way to do them. We're going to do a little sit to stand routine that incorporates getting out of a chair, turning around, which can be a dangerous and vulnerable event. If you're up and around, turning around, a lot of times people get to an end of a hall and they need to turn around and they turn backwards to go forwards or to reverse their direction. We never want to do that. We want to think of turning as a forward turn. So we're going to work on that. And then the other thing you'll see sometimes with Parkinson's is someone's coming to a chair and they're not even near the chair and they're kind of sitting down already and they are ending up kind of like this crooked on a chair. And that's not good either, and it's not safe. So we're going to do a quick routine here that incorporates these three actions. And for the getting into the chair, I created a routine called GPS, which stands for get there, position, sit. We're breaking that action down into three specific parts, and we're going to add some finger snaps to define them. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get up out of the chair and we're going to stand up. We've got up out of the chair. So this little sit to stand is a form of exercise that's really great for leg strength and quad and hip strength. So we're going to use a technique I call the and up. You're going to throw yourself forward and stand up. Once standing, we're going to turn around. We're going to forward turn to your right, walking forward here, around in a circle. And now we're going to return to the chair. So we're going to GPS it. We're going to get there. I'm here in front of the chair. Snap my fingers. I'm going to position myself. I'm positioned. And then I'm going to sit. Glance back, the chair's there. And once I sit, I'm going to come up out of the chair. And again, you don't have to participate this or watch it. Get yourself to the bathroom or get a drink of water. And we'll be back with the programming in a moment. This time I'm going to turn around to the left. And now I'm going to get there. Bam, I'm going to position myself. Bam, and I'm going to sit. And for the last thing we're going to do, we're going to, in our mind's eye, take us to a closet. We're going to imagine we're sitting in front of a closet in our home. And we're going to sit to stand, and we're going to reach up to the top shelf of that closet and grab what is ever there and sit down. So when we reach up, we're going to do a move called triple extension, which is the hip, knee, and finally the ankle. So we're going to come up, there's the hip and the knee, and then up on our tiptoes, grab the object and bring it on back down. So that's our quick routine. It's a way to transition an activity of daily living into an exercise. This is like tasks we do throughout the day, converting it to exercise. So we'll do this a couple times and then we'll continue with our presentation. So we're going to sit to stand. We're going to forward turn to the right, and we're going to get funky with this. We're going to come on into the chair. Bam, we're going to get there. Bam, and we're going to sit. Bam, define these stages, make them clean and up. Forward turn around to the left, and we're going to get there. Bam, we're going to position ourselves. Bam, and we're going to sit. And now we're going to that closet in our imagination, up to that top shelf. Grab that, whatever it is, down and sit. One more time. Up out of the chair. Forward turn. We want to create habits that are safe for us to do during the day. So sometimes when we're not even thinking about it, we're going to get there. Bam, we're going to position. We're going to sit. We want to create behaviors that are safe. And the forward turn is when we're practicing right now. We're going to turn to the left. We're going to GPS it. We're going to get there. We're going to position ourselves. Bam, and we're going to sit, and then we're going to go up to the top shelf of this closet, up on your tiptoes, grab it, and come on back down. And now we're just going to do 6 sit to stands to kind of tear it down and work the legs up all the way to the top. And here's 3. Breathe. Don't hold your breath ever. 4. 2 more. 5. And 1 more. And 6. Set your posture and return to the chair. Okay. So we got up. And those of you that didn't participate, got your drinks ready and did your bathroom break. We've got a great presentation here next. I'm really excited to hear this on delusion and Parkinson's disease. So welcome back, everyone. We're going to get back going with the presentation. Our next presenter has been with us since the beginning of PCLA. Dr. Szumski is a movement disorder specialist at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. And as the chair of PCLA's Medical Advisory Board, he advises us on current medical issues that affect those living with Parkinson's. He's going to be talking to us today about the hallucinations and delusions that can sometimes impact people with Parkinson's. Thank you, Nick, for being here with us.
Thank you, Patrick, for having me. And thank you to everybody else on the panel and on the board. What we're going to try to do today is go through a topic that I think for many people with Parkinson's and family members of people with Parkinson's can be kind of a difficult topic. It's a little bit daunting. It's frankly a little bit frightening sometimes. And so this is something that people may keep to themselves and miss out on the opportunity to actually get appropriate diagnosis and treatment. I'm going to see if we can start some slides here. And if I can figure out how to share my screen. Actually, I don't know how to do that easily. Anybody in the host side know how to help me?
I made you a co-host. You should be able to see the share screen button at the bottom. Just hover your mouse. It's right in the center at the bottom. And you should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect.
All right. All right, so hopefully everybody can see the first slide here that says key definitions. So give me a holler if that's not what's up there. So where I wanted to start this conversation is really with getting a common language. It's important to know what we're talking about when we're discussing things. And so even though they're pretty clear lay definitions of some of these things, we use them in language outside of medicine. I want to talk about hallucinations, illusions, and delusions, and talk about what they mean. I also want to talk about the word psychosis, because psychosis can, despite our understanding from things like Hollywood, which sort of gives us the impression that people with psychosis are serial killers and things like that. That's really an unfair presentation of the word. Psychosis really actually fundamentally refers to the presence of hallucinations and delusions. And I mention that because some of the medications that are out there for Parkinson's disease, hallucinations and delusions, use the word psychosis in their advertising, and that can really frighten people that, wait, am I going to be psychotic one day? And not realizing like, oh, it refers to the symptoms that I already have and I'm already incorporating into my life as it is. It's not something that you necessarily have to fear. And so the last point on this screen that I wanted to point out is just as a start, it is quite possible to have hallucinations or have a delusion and still be quite capable intellectually in other ways. I've had very interesting conversations with patients who tell me that they see, one that comes to mind, they saw a person sitting up in the corner. They knew that person in the corner was not real, they knew that person was not there. And we were able to discuss their medication doses, their medication side effects, a plan for treatment, and so on and so forth, just one-on-one independently, despite the fact that there was this invisible visitor. And so that's one example that the presence of hallucinations or delusions doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is not able to have a normal functioning, cognitive discussion about other topics. So what are hallucinations? It's seeing something that's not there. And so the range in Parkinson's can be from very mild to severe. And at the very mild stage of things, a lot of people will mention that they feel or see sort of a presence out of the corner of their eye, and their attention may be directed in that direction, and they realize there's nothing there. And sometimes that perception takes on a little bit of a form, sort of a fuzziness, but it's still not a thing. It's just like, I thought something was, somebody was coming over my shoulder or something, but no, there's nobody there to do that. With progression, sometimes it takes on more of a form. It may take a form of a person, an animal. In fact, those are actually very common manifestations. People seen in hallucinations of Parkinson's are very often silent, which is kind of an interesting quirk. They are often perceived as more benign, but somewhat rude guests because they don't speak, they don't respond, they don't answer, but sometimes you might be surprised. Somebody might say there's somebody else in the room, and instead of behaving like there's an intruder, they behave like they're a sort of unexpected guest, which is I find kind of fascinating, but I won't go into too much detail there except to point that out. So those are some common themes in Parkinson's. Another one that I'll just put out there, because I have one patient who we're working really hard to try to eliminate this one. She sees bugs everywhere, including on her food. She is quite aware that they're not there, but it's really making it a challenge for her because she has to overcome what she sees in order to eat. And it's, you know, we're making some strides, but it's been a challenge. Illusions are slightly but importantly different. And this is misperceiving something that is there as something else. And this is probably something everyone has experienced at one time or another. And the most obvious example might be you come home, it's late at night, you open the door, and over there you see someone standing in the corner, and then you turn on the light and realize that's your coat rack, and your hat and your coat just for a moment made your brain perceive that there was someone there. And so an illusion can be sort of an important variation on the theme. A pillow can become a cat, believe it or not, a fire hydrant or mailbox can become a small child at a distance. That one's an interesting one. And within the home, it can sometimes be really important to address this by thinking about shadows. So dim lighting can be a factor here. And so brighter lighting, which I think it was Dr. Johnson mentioned the idea of lighting your pathway to the bathroom. It also can help here to have a little bit of ambient light to help avoid sort of difficult things to perceive in the dark. Delusions are fixed false beliefs. In other words, it's we can all make an error. We can believe something and find out later, oh, we were wrong. Okay, sorry. But a fixed false belief means that it's not easily explained away. So if somebody believes something, you say, hey, that's not true, there's no evidence for that, and they keep believing it, that could be a delusion. Common themes in Parkinson's include financial worries, which can be, you know, that members of the family are trying to take money, or possibly people outside the family, and can result in behaviors like hiding money or hiding valuables. That one's fairly common. Infidelity of a spouse is fairly common, and can be, you know, pretty challenging for the spouse who has to deal with accusations with no basis. And then just persecutory in general, meaning, you know, people are watching me, people are after me, things like that. And often it could be, there could be sort of a vague sense of someone's after me. Sometimes it takes on some specifics of, you know, an entity, but you know, it can call into the delusion things like what's happening on the television. People might watch a television show and believe what's happening in the show is actually happening to them. These can definitely cause a lot of stress on a family. And so one pointer I'm just going to throw in here, because I think it's valuable to hear, is when these kinds of things come up, it's very tempting to argue and say, no, that's not true. Why would I do that? Or why would anybody do that? Or why would the TV be talking to you? I think in general, once something like this appears on the scene and becomes an issue, a good piece of advice is try to avoid direct confrontation or disagreement. In other words, avoid saying no, and instead say, I understand your concern. You know, what would you like for lunch? Let's talk about something else. And that doesn't always work, but I think when people see a person they trust arguing with a belief they hold very closely, it can actually create some distrust in that person. Like, why are you part of this? If they're after me and you don't believe that, that makes me think you're part of it too. And that can be very stressful for everyone involved. So sometimes just acknowledge, I understand the anxiety that you're feeling. That sounds very stressful. Let's talk about something else. So causes of hallucinations and delusions in Parkinson's. Parkinson's itself introduces the risk of developing these gradually and over time. So the longer you have Parkinson's, the higher the risk that these will make an appearance. And when they do appear, they do have a tendency to gradually worsen with time. The medications we use to treat motor symptoms in Parkinson's may also provoke or exacerbate them. So if you haven't seen them to this point, but then we put you on a new medication, they may emerge. If you already have had some hallucinations and then we increase your medication, they may get worse and so forth. So those are really important concepts to keep in mind. And the theme of what's happening gradually and slowly and worsening, and what is happening because of what's going on right now, like this medication, very important. I get asked a lot, what causes hallucinations in Parkinson's? Is it Parkinson's or is it the medications? And my answer is both. And I like to respond with this question. If you go outside in the rain without an umbrella and you get soaking wet, are you wet because it's raining, or are you wet because you don't have an umbrella? And the answer is both. The rain is probably the Parkinson's in this case, meaning, you know, the water has to come from somewhere. The propensity for hallucinations comes from the Parkinson's, but in many cases, the appearance may come from the medications. Echoing something that also came up in Dr. Johnson's talk, when things change abruptly, we really have to look at that very carefully, because Parkinson's, when it affects cognition and perceptions, so hallucinations, delusions, and things like that, it comes on gradually and slowly. When it happens quickly over days, or sometimes a little bit longer than that, the way I put it to patients often is, if they can point to the calendar and say, this is where things changed, right about here, that tells me this change is not Parkinson's. Parkinson's is setting up what's going on. Parkinson's is sort of the foundation for the problem, but something else is coming along and stirring the pot, so to speak. And so the key three areas that I sort of think of when somebody has an abrupt change and starts having hallucinations that weren't there just a few days ago, I think first of infections. UTI, or bladder infection, is at the top of that list because they're very common, and often, this is important, often the hallucinations or other changes that can come with the infection may come before any obvious symptoms of a bladder infection. So you may not have any bladder symptoms, or you may have bladder symptoms due to Parkinson's and nothing has really changed that you can tell. And yet hallucinations just arose. It's worth being very vigilant and to look for that infection. Pneumonia is another fairly common example. Skin infections, and I have a growing sort of handful of case reports of people with painless tooth abscesses who actually, when they got a root canal, their hallucinations got better. And I can go on and tell you some other interesting stories. But infection, very important. Medication changes, also very important to look at. The change may be intentional. Your neurologist or movement disorder specialist may increase your medication and then hallucinations result. Or it could come from a medicine that was intentionally prescribed for something totally different, for blood pressure, for prostate, for something else. And it may provoke these symptoms. It can also be unintentional. And so sometimes we'll explore, pharmacy mishaps, accidentally getting a refill of the wrong medication, or oops, I filled my medication organizer with the wrong pill. It's happened. So looking at what might have changed can be very valuable. That's not often the case, but every so often it is, and it's an easy fix when it is. The last of this triad is sleep disturbances. Even one night of poor sleep in Parkinson's can provoke symptoms, and it's easy to underestimate the impact of that. I had a patient recently that kind of illustrated this, and so I'll tell the story quickly. Independent, lived alone, active, playing basketball, in fact, and suddenly became quite just floridly hallucinating, just all day, and importantly, all night. A urinary tract infection was found and it was treated, and that seemed to help a little bit, but it didn't solve the problem. And part of the reason was he was still not sleeping. The hallucinations were keeping him from sleeping. So we made some medication changes and helped him get some good night's sleep. And within a few days of that, he was back to being independent, his old self, playing basketball. And that remains the same now. I think it's been about a year since that. So this manifestation appeared, huge change. We found the underlying causes, and he's back to his old baseline again. So an important special case and another definition. I want people to know about the word delirium or what that means. It refers to a state of waxing and waning confusion, agitation, and often hallucinations and delusions. And it is something that is provoked by a stimulus, something like we just talked about, medication changes, sleep changes, that sort of thing. It can arise at home, and one common example that people may be already familiar with is it's been known as sundowning. And it has to do with the fact that sometimes when the sun, literally as it goes down and it gets dark and evening falls, people can go from being quite clear and aware of their surroundings to having some confusion or seeing hallucinations or having beliefs that aren't accurate that seem to occur just at night. It's a prime time for changes. Very commonly, though, delirium is something that is seen in the hospital, sometimes because it happened at home and people have to be hospitalized, but often it happens when people are in the hospital for something else, an illness, a surgery. The issue at hand, for instance, if you're in the hospital with an infection, can provoke these problems, but also the sleep disruption of all the noise and people coming in to check vitals and labs, medication disruption, which is an unfortunate consequence. Often when people are admitted to the hospital, it can take a little while to get their medications in the hospital to match what they should at home. The fact that the surroundings are unfamiliar can amplify the sundowning process. People look around and they don't, not only do they not know where they are, but they may think they're in, being held captive or something like that. That's a common problem. And then new medications. So somebody who just went through anesthesia for a surgery or is getting routine post-operative pain medications may not react very well in the hospital with Parkinson's. It may have delirium symptoms. So hallucinations and delusions may emerge in the hospital, and it may take some special attention to some of these factors to get them to go back and go away again. Importantly, delirium is not dementia. And I say that because even doctors misappropriate those two words and interchange them when it's really not appropriate. So I want my patients, I want their families, I want the people participating in this talk, I want people to understand that there's a big difference. Dementia is a slow, gradual process that worsens over time and can happen, as in Dr. Johnson's talk, can happen gradually and slowly with Parkinson's. Delirium, though, is that rapid change. It's the change that happened, like everything was fine until 2 days ago, and now, wow, everything is so different. And my family member who a few days ago we were planning a trip, and now they're thinking that somebody's after them, and they're seeing people all around the house. This was never a problem. That sounds like delirium. Cognitive decline or dementia, if people have reached that point, does definitely make delirium more likely. So they're related, but dementia is progressive and gradual. Delirium occurs rapidly and is reversible. When delirium happens, it's just really important to understand that there's something that can be done to undo the situation. Sometimes it's easier to figure out than others, but when changes happen rapidly, it generally quite strongly implies that it's reversible. This last statement is, I added in here partly because just even in the last few weeks, I've had a few patients of mine with Parkinson's have an abrupt eruption of hallucinations and be admitted to hospitals far away from me. So I couldn't come in and be the consulting doctor. And the doctors there came to the conclusion that, well, I guess this is the end stage of Parkinson's. Maybe we should make some big decisions as a family, and really, shocked and frightened the families in those cases. And my role is to say, hey, wait a second. I just had a conversation with her in a visit a few weeks ago. It was one-on-one. She was able to tell me her medicines, her schedule, what she liked about her regimen, what she didn't like, and what our plan was. This is not somebody who's at the end stage. So in fact, they found a urinary tract infection and they treated it, and she got quite a bit better. We're still working on this, but she's still having sleep problems. But it takes education to get people to realize that sometimes the emergence of these symptoms is a reason to start a search for a cause, a search for a solution. So I want my patients, my families to be informed about this, so that if something changes, they can, as an outpatient, if they're at home, they can bring it to their attention of their doctor and say, you know what, hallucinations just started over the weekend. I think we may need to check for an infection. And when somebody's in the hospital, to advocate and point out, I know, you might see somebody who looks elderly and they're on a lot of medications, and you can jump to some conclusions, but a family member can say, but I'll tell you, this person a week ago, we were taking a walk in the park, and they were explaining different kinds of trees and different kinds of birds, and we were making a plan for, what to do later in the winter. And really, you can paint a picture that says, hey, what we're seeing here in the hospital, this is so far afield from what we're used to seeing, that it can help the doctors recognize that they have a challenge in front of them. They have to figure out what's going on, and they need to help reverse that. So let's talk about treatments. My first approach, or first sort of pass, is to make sure that we address the acute environmental reasons for why people may be having these symptoms. Things that provoke or worsen the symptoms that we can fix. For example, I mentioned earlier, changing bedroom lighting so there's less shadowy things to be seen as illusions can eliminate a lot of problems. Identifying and treating an infection or another systemic illness, like a breakdown of kidney function or liver function, can be absolutely crucial to figuring out what's going on. Adjustment or reconsideration of medication. We might want to undo a change that was made. If the change had good intentions but resulted in hallucinations, we may want to undo it and go back to the drawing board. One thing to think about is that because the side effects of medications tend to occur when the blood levels are high, so if you take a pill like Sinemet, for instance, the dose rises in your system and falls off, and it's that peak period at the top where people may be most likely to experience these as side effects. So as more and more formulations of medication come out, the more smoothly we can deliver medication, the more continuous it is, the more we may be able to steer away from those problems. We may be able to steer away from medication-induced side effects because we don't have to deal with those peaks in the dosing. And then last one on this list, address sleep disturbance vigorously. And by that, I mean, I sort of on an eternal quest with my patients to get them a good night's sleep, because there are so many things in Parkinson's that can go wrong with sleep. And so addressing those and really focusing on getting that sleep back can have a huge impact. And my story earlier, I think, illustrated that. The infection was clearly what destabilized things and caused these problems to arise with hallucinations. But the final solution, the final ingredient to fixing the situation was getting him a few nights of good night's sleep, and the problem hasn't been seen since. Next up, we'll talk about some medication options. And I'll emphasize in advance and again at the end, medication options are something you should have a conversation with your Parkinson's specialist or your neurologist, because the treatment options need to be considered on an individualized basis, and they have their pros and their cons. And so none of these should be taken as something that you in particular need to be on or should be on, but rather I want to give people kind of a breadth of what's out there. Despite how common this problem is, and it's quite common for people to experience some degree of hallucinations at some point in their arc of Parkinson's, there's only one medication to date that has gone through the FDA process of demonstrating that it works for hallucinations and delusions in Parkinson's, or so-called Parkinson's psychosis. And that medicine is called Nuplazid, or pimavanserin is the generic. One of the reasons I have a bit of a soapbox about the word psychosis is their initial advertising for this medication was actually quite frightening, and they use the word psychosis a lot. And I think it actually scared a lot of people who were worried that what they described in the commercial or the words they used sort of painted this really frightening picture of their own future. And I had many conversations with patients where I had to explain, well, what they're talking about, you and I have been treating for years. Those mild hallucinations that you have over here when you're working on the computer, the ones that went away when we made this change or that. That's actually part of what they're describing. And that helps calm people and realize, oh, this psychosis word encompasses a huge range. But Nuplazid remains the only FDA approved treatment. That being said, I want to make it also clear that doesn't mean it's the only one that works. A medicine called Exelon or rivastigmine was a medicine that is FDA approved for treatment of Alzheimer's. But when a study looked at it to see if it would help memory in Parkinson's, what they actually found is that it helped reduce hallucinations. So sort of an unexpected benefit. In my clinical experience with it, I've seen it work quite well in a number of cases. I'm actually a really big fan of this medicine in the right clinical scenario. There's another class of medications called the neuroleptics or the antipsychotics. These are medicines that in many people's minds, they associate these with things like schizophrenia. The ones on this page are special, and you'll be clear why on the next page what I'm talking about. Clozaril or clozapine does not worsen Parkinson's motor symptoms, and that's in contrast to a number of medicines in this category that do. Clozaril, on the other hand, does require very close monitoring of blood counts for an uncommon but very real, and when it happens, a very severe side effect that involves the blood counts dropping. So Clozaril is a bit of a challenge because it comes with a big responsibility of going to the lab very often and maintaining the medication. That being said, it's also quite effective. So it's in the right situation, it can be a very valuable medicine. The other one on this list, quetiapine or Seroquel, is also unlikely to worsen Parkinson's motor symptoms. It may at very high doses, but generally speaking, it doesn't cause trouble. It's not considered a very good antipsychotic in most cases, but one of its side effects is sleepiness. And I think in many cases, the way it works most effectively, it just helps people sleep. It helps people sleep through the night. And if their hallucinations are coming at night, sleeping through that period, sleeping soundly, can both help avoid them at the time you're sleeping, and the good night's sleep could be helpful the next day. So sometimes that's an appropriate addition to the regimen. The other medications in this category, and I listed some there just in case you want to see if you recognize one. These are generally avoided in Parkinson's, except in very special cases where you're really, you've tried so many other things, you don't have any other avenue to try to get things under better control. Because these, the way they work is to block dopamine. And as most of you know, Parkinson's is largely a dopamine, a loss of dopamine is the root cause of a lot of the motor symptoms. So something that blocks dopamine can actually worsen that. And so we try to avoid these medicines in most cases. And so the list here is again, more for recognition purposes, not a suggestion to be on them. So a few key summary points. It's fairly common to experience hallucinations and delusions in Parkinson's. So if that happens, don't panic, don't despair, and certainly don't assume that it's the beginning of the end, because people can have mild hallucinations that we're treating for years, sometimes many years, without having developed into anything more alarming. They can be related to cognitive decline, but as we talked about, they're not the same thing. So it shouldn't be equated that somebody who has a hallucination is automatically demented or incapable of making intellectual decisions and understanding what's going on around them. If they're confused, like delirium, they may not be able to, but that's reversible. If it's part of the long course of Parkinson's, you may find that you can have a normal conversation about politics, the weather, sports, with somebody who's also describing to you the hallucinations that they have on a daily basis. Rapid changes or delirium, it's due to something outside of Parkinson's. So if something changes quickly, get it addressed, seek to find the cause, talk to your doctor, be an advocate to begin the search. And then be ready and think about this, to openly discuss these kinds of symptoms with your family and your neurologist. I think they can be kind of embarrassing or frightening to talk about, but bringing them up allows for a better understanding of why they're happening and possibly a route towards getting rid of them. So I want to thank everybody for their attention, and I can open it up for some questions at this point.
Thank you so much. Nick, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. What a great presentation on a subject matter that I'm sure for many people is scary, possibly distressing. And I want to thank you for your reassuring and calming approach to this topic. It was really special. So thank you. Let's jump in. Is it dangerous if you experience delirium after surgery for a hip fracture? From Donna.
It certainly could present a danger. Somebody who wakes up from hip surgery and who believes they are being kept captive against their will and don't understand that the people attending to them are nurses and possibly family members could attempt to get out of the bed. That could result in a fall. That could result in a major complication. So it can be dangerous. And I think realizing that is half the battle. So recognizing that a lot of trouble may follow a surgery is half the battle, because it means being prepared for it. I think a lot of times the reason trouble happens is because no one saw it coming, including in some cases the surgeons. I've worked with many surgeons who are very well aware of this, and I really appreciate their understanding that, you know, that after the surgery they may have a day or two where their patient, who was totally cognizant as they discuss having the surgery, suddenly thinks everyone is out to get them. But we try to make sure they get good sleep. We try to minimize their pain medications, and a couple days later, you know, welcome back. We're talking to that same person again, and having that happen it's really important to understand that it could happen, and that's where information and advocacy can be very helpful.
Now, are you, in terms of the preparation, are you talking about the family and the medical staff, or is preparing the actual individual itself, having a conversation that this may happen, to be aware of this? Is that helpful as well?
To me, it's more for family and for the treating team. It's not really practical. You can't talk to the floor nurses that are going to be taking care of somebody after surgery. You don't know who they will be. But if you've talked with the treating physician, so their team, you know, their colleagues are aware that yes, this may happen, or even it has happened before. But the family can be invaluable in repeating that to nursing staff and so forth, and saying like, look, this is not how things are at home. A week ago, before this surgery, you know, we were having totally lucid conversations, and so something isn't quite right. Have we ruled out infection? Are we sure she needs that much medication, and so forth? And so that's being prepared to face those conversations, and not sort of, I'm not saying a family member would ever just shrug and be like, well, I guess that's how it is, but I don't want that. I don't want anybody to feel like, well, I'll just sit passively and watch and hope for the best. Like when things like this happen, it's important to initiate conversations. What do you think is causing this? And if the answer you get is, well, that's probably from Parkinson's, then the answer I would give is, well, of course, Parkinson's is part of playing the role, but they had Parkinson's last week, and last week, none of this was going on. So what's going on today?
Wow, that's great. That's really a lesson for care partners as well. Are auditory hallucinations rare in these situations?
Auditory hallucinations are less frequently described in Parkinson's. They do come up, but in my experience, and I think in the literature, it's less frequently seen, and that's one of the facets that I find so fascinating about hallucinations of people in Parkinson's, that they're often very silent visitors, and more than one patient has come up with a quick check to see if that person's real or hallucination. You just ask them to answer a simple question: what's your name, or who are you? And if they get no answer, then that's maybe a big clue. Okay, that person's not actually there.
Interesting. So this is a longer question. If patient is on Nuplazid, I think I'm saying that right, and is admitted to the hospital, and the hospital pharmacy is not familiar, or the hospitalist is not familiar with the medication, they might not continue to use it while they are in the hospital. I know the pharmacy can and will use your medication when the doctor okays it, but how can we educate the hospitalist about Nuplazid, or any other Parkinson medication, so they will continue the regimen, especially if medication isn't why they are admitted to the hospital?
It's an excellent question. And right below that, Dr. Keener has provided a link because this is a problem that's universal. It happens all across the country in amazing hospitals. People get into situations where they're not continued on their home medications. So that can be part of being prepared and being an advocate, is actually bringing those medications, bringing perhaps all the medications. And so that can help with reconciliation, which is the process where they verify, okay, they take how many pills and how many times a day. But also if they say we don't have Nuplazid, they can have a process where they temporarily take possession of the medications and then re-administer it back to the patient. So the pharmacy can give it as though it's a medication from the hospital, but it's actually the patient's own medication. So bringing pills and a piece of advice, in the original bottles whenever possible, that, you know, the prescription bottles can be a very valuable way to fill gaps and enhance communication so that the team really understands this is what the medication regimen looks like.
That's great. I have hallucinations at night during my sleep. What indications should I look for to indicate I should take meds? I am newly diagnosed with right hand tremor and hallucination, neither of which bother me. No meds so far. So
I really appreciate this question because I debated adding, I could have probably talked for several hours on this topic if given the opportunity. And one of the things I left out, but really wanted a chance to say something about, and it's perfect here, is that things that happen during the night are often called hallucinations, but sometimes we have to look really closely at what's really going on. Vivid dreams are very common in Parkinson's. And in some cases, maybe a precursor to the advent of hallucinations. But those vivid dreams can be so realistic that if they're plausible, in other words, you weren't riding a dragon around through space with superpowers, if people have had dreams of a conversation with a neighbor, and then had the very awkward situation the next day of talking to the neighbor and finding out that conversation did not take place. And so it can create a situation that looks a lot like a hallucination. If you wake up in the middle of the night having dreamt of an intruder very vividly, you may start acting quite logically as though there's an intruder in your house, not because you still see them, but because you remember seeing one or having evidence of one from a dream. I've said before to some of my colleagues, I wish we had a word for this, the idea that you can wake up from a vivid dream and misappropriate what just happened in the dream in the real world, because then what people do, it may seem less like a hallucination. It's like it's the logical extension of a vivid dream that you don't realize was a dream. It was so real and translates right into your bedroom. There was an intruder in my bedroom and now I'm awake. Where'd he go? And so a chase around the house to look for it may look kind of wild and crazy to a family member, but if you think about it from the person's point of view, it may turn out that was a dream. And so some approaches to avoiding waking up during a dream, there are some medications that can work on that, or just helping ensure better sleep through the night can sometimes keep that from happening. But I think personally, I think it's very important to look at things that happen at night and not necessarily assume that they're hallucinations, even though they involve seeing or believing something that's not there. The root cause may actually not be the same as what happens during the day. It might actually be arising from sleep.
Well, I think that we've got all of our questions. Wait, okay. Vivid dreams can be dangerous. What besides trying to tie one to the bedpost can help? I think that's what
I don't recommend tying anything to a bedpost. But there are medications that can quiet movements in sleep. Melatonin has been shown to do that. Clonazepam is another medicine that, when used carefully, can help suppress activity during dream sleep. And it can help induce a quieter, calmer night of sleep, which often results in two people getting a better night's sleep, both the person at the center of the treatment and a spouse or bed partner who is getting yelled at or yelled near or screamed at or getting kicked, things like that. A very quiet night can follow with the right treatment program.
Okay. Can you hear me, Nick? I just had to switch cameras and stuff. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your handling of this topic as well. We all really appreciate you. So thank you so much for your time, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay, so before I introduce our last speaker, I want to mention again that immediately after this webinar ends, you're invited to join us for an opportunity to chat with PCLA and our program sponsors. The email you received this morning with the link for this event also includes a link to this special Life Beyond the Basics breakout meeting. Our next topic is a big one, but before we get to this, once again, we're so glad that you've joined us for our annual educational conference. Our education programs, support groups, information referral services, and more all free to the community. If you are enjoying today's program, please consider making a tax-deductible donation at PCLA.org. We have an additional cent incentive to donate right now, thanks to a matching gift program made possible by our generous PCLA board members. Your donations today will have double the impact. Please join us in changing the lives of those living with Parkinson's disease. We put a link to PCLA's website where you can donate in the chat, and thank you in advance for your generosity. Now, join me in welcoming Dr. Michele Tagliati. Dr. Tagliati has also been with PCLA since our beginning, serves as our clinical research advisor and keeping us up to date on the latest in Parkinson's research. Dr. Tagliati is a movement disorder specialist and a director of the Movement Disorders Program at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Patrick. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Yes, let me share my screen. Oh my God, what is it? Here it is.
We got you.
There's some, there you go. I think we have it. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we're good.
We can see.
Very good, very good. So thank you again for having me. I understand that I'm the only thing separating you from lunch. So I will go straight to the point. We're going to talk about research, and research is a very large and complex topic that go from basic science research or preclinical animal studies all the way to studies in the communities, epidemiological studies. Today, I want to focus mostly on clinical trials because clinical trials are what are most immediately available to the community. And that's where the new medications and the new idea get practically experimented on our patients with Parkinson's disease. And many of you may be familiar with this pyramid that did 4 stages of clinical trials. Stage 1, which is basically only to test the safety. Stage 2, to see whether these medications are actually effective. Stage 3, which larger scale in hundreds, thousands of patients. And then stage 4 to see the long-term safety of the medications. And this is a long and painful journey out of any 10,000 compounds that go into the process of drug discovery through the 4 stages that we just reviewed. Basically only one results into an active medication. So you can imagine the amount of work, investment, and at the end of the day, also frustrations that many basic and clinical researchers and patients and participants to research needs to go. The good news is that there are a lot of clinical trials ongoing. This is a recent review based on clinicaltrial.gov. There are over 1,100 clinical trials ongoing in the United States. Many of them are interventional, meaning that they're actually testing some new drug or device. And you see the division between the different phases. And this is the geographical distribution. You see there are clinical studies pretty much all over the United States. We're fortunate in California to be, I think, the richest state in terms of clinical trial activity, thanks to, of course, academic institutions like Cedars-Sinai, UCLA, USC, Stanford, UCSD, and so forth. What is the benefit for a patient to participate in the clinical trial, it's worth reviewing this concept, of course, gain access to new and possibly effective treatments, gain sometimes focused healthcare, because when someone participates in a clinical trial, they get monitored, they get tested, they get followed more often, learn more about their disease, have a chance to help others, even if the medication in and of itself may not be immediately helpful to them. And sometimes they may get reimbursed or paid, although this is, in my opinion, is not a good reason to participate, specifically to participate in clinical trials. These advantages are there. Of course, you have to be more committed to more health visits. Sometimes you may need to spend more money for traveling and medical tests. You may go through placebo or not effective medications that might cause, of course, some disappointment or frustration, or even going through some unexpected side effects. But in general, clinical trials, participation, volunteering for a clinical trial contribute to the development of new medication or maybe new treatment guidelines, discovery on new ways to prevent or cure diseases, improving the way also doctors, nurses, and other health professionals are trained and influence policies, laws, and funding for health services. So needless to say, I want to encourage everybody to consider at least participation or volunteering for clinical trials. So there are many clinical trials. We cannot review them all. There are two great big categories: symptomatic therapies and disease modification strategies. And we heard already from Dr. Keener a lot about some of the new ideas being tested, both for motor and non-motor symptoms. So I will skip the symptomatic therapies research, and I will focus on what I consider the holy grail of research for Parkinson's disease, which is disease modification or neuroprotection or whatever you want to call it. There are a number of strategies to modify the inevitable progression of Parkinson's disease. We can try to support the compensatory mechanisms that might rescue or survive or improve the surviving of the dopaminergic neurons. We may try to salvage these neurons by improving their metabolic activities or provide some trophy, basically feed them better. We may restore some of the dying cells with cell-based therapy, or we may prevent the degeneration altogether, which, however, requires a better understanding of the first stage of the diseases, but we'll talk a lot about that today. Unfortunately, there is a long and painful history of failures in the attempt of neuroprotection. This is a cartoon from an article from my friend Alberto Espe, and you see all these gravestones of all these ideas, all these compounds that were tried, that were hoped for Parkinson's. Why all these failures? Well, first of all, it's important to remember that Parkinson's disease is not a single disease or a single cause disease. And there is a lot of difference between different patients that might have similar symptoms, but different causes. And so a one-size-fits-all approach might not improve everybody's or explain everybody's disease. Consequentially, the preclinical models, the animal models of Parkinson's disease are very imperfect, and many times, most times, do not even represent what happens then in humans. And so if you test your ideas on a model that does not represent the actual disease, it's going to be difficult then to bring that idea to effect. We heard earlier this morning a question about biomarkers, and the effective biomarkers are lacking to some degree. There are a number of them, but not always help in monitoring or in representing the progression of the disease. And last but not least, what we call early stage disease in Parkinson's disease, meaning the beginning of the neurological symptoms, is not the beginning of the disease. And patients that are classified as having early stage disease may have already been through extensive neurodegeneration. In fact, it is calculated that when we make the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, when the first symptoms occur, about 30%, if not more, of the substantia nigra cells that produce dopamine have already been lost. They already died. And so everybody can understand that it's difficult to prevent a disease or to intervene when already half of the bank account is gone. So this is a very important issue and brings the big question, the big $1 million question: when does Parkinson's disease really start? And we know now, as a matter of fact, that there is a very well-defined pre-motor stage or pre-neurological state that can precede sometimes the motor symptoms by almost 2 decades, that, however, create a great window of opportunities to not only understand better the disease, but intervene when actually we have a substantial amount of our dopaminergic and brain cells in general to save. And you see how there are a number of them, but there are 3 key symptoms. REM behavior disorder, we already heard it mentioned several times today, loss of smell and constipation, that seems to be key in the identification of the premotor stage. And this is quite remarkable, because if we look at these 3 symptoms and the risk that they bring in, the risk of developing Parkinson, if you have one of the 3, any of the 3, the risk of developing Parkinson at some point in the future increased 5 times. If you have 2 of them, the risk increased 33 times. If you have 3 of them, increase 160 times. Now, in my mind, a risk that increased 160 times is not even a risk. The disease is already there, and we're just waiting for other symptoms to come in. So this is a key time, in my mind, to intervene. And these are concepts that are fairly well known. The problem is that what do you do with that? Like, we can tell people ideally that they might develop Parkinson's disease within 5 to 10 years, but then what do we do with that? It's almost unethical to disclose this knowledge. Well, we know that these symptoms don't come out of nowhere. We know from the studies of Dr. Brack that there is a progression. There is a progression in the disease that come from different parts of the substantia nigra, and the so-called premotor stage, where hyposmia, constipation, REM behavior disorder, sometimes depression might be present, come from areas like the locus coeruleus and the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus nerve that are linked not to dopamine, but to the autonomic system, to norepinephrine, to other neurotransmitters. So I think that we need to look into that, because it might give us different angles, different doors to understand the process and modify it. So REM behavior disorder, for example, has been associated, again, not to dopamine, not to other neurotransmitter, but to noradrenergic activity, because of a particular effect of a medication that actually many here might be familiar with, mirtazapine, which is used as an antidepressant and the sleep medication. And mirtazapine increases REM behavior disorder by enhancing noradrenergic activity. This is important because, in my mind at least, because instead of something that is declining, we always think about Parkinson's disease as something declining, right? Something degenerating. Here we have a symptoms that is part of the syndrome, at least in the premotor stage, and instead is associated to an increase, to an overactivity. What do we do with that? Well, first of all, we discuss about biomarker. We need to look at how can we measure this, and noradrenaline, norepinephrine, which is associated, as you might know, with stress in general, It's very difficult to measure because it comes and goes. It's very variable. If you measure it at 10 o'clock in the morning or 1 p.m. or 10 p.m., it might be completely different. So it's very imperfect, but we have been working recently with a heart test. It's been used by cardiologists for many, many years to measure the noradrenergic effect on the heart, and it's called the MIBG. And you see there is, you can measure increase or decrease adrenergic drive with certain values. We'll get back to that. And it's interesting to know that REM behavior disorder, again, pre-motor activity, it has a similar MIBG, a similar heart scan than Parkinson's disease, okay? So it's another issue that kind of put them very, very close together. But when you have a bad heart scan in RBD, you have a normal dopamine areas in the brain. So you clearly have something that is going on, but has not yet affected the dopamine production, the substantia nigra and the basal ganglia. Then with time, as you can see in the study that was published a few years ago, also the dopaminergic systems are failing and the full picture of Parkinson's disease appears. So we have a situation in which everything is normal, and of course there is no disease. The early disease, non-neurological disease, we can see a abnormal heart test, but a normal brain test. And then the neurological disease, the full-fledged Parkinson's disease, shows both the heart and the brain having an abnormal test. So using these patterns, we started to ask ourselves some questions like, okay, how can we reverse it? Can we reverse it? Can we treat this? And we've been working with cardiologists, and we learned that cardiologists actually use the MIBG to see who can get into a heart attack or some severe heart dysfunction after having maybe an infarct or other problems. And interestingly, what they do with that, they don't try to increase the norepinephrine and noradrenaline, but try to block it. They give people beta blockers. Anybody that is listening who had the misfortune to have a heart attack knows that the beta blockers are heart-saving medications because they reduce the effect of noradrenergic input on the heart. And interestingly, these beta blockers improve the signal of the MIBG that we decided is a marker of degeneration. This is very interesting because there's a lot of research going on this beta blocker or beta stimulants. And there is a big study that showed that actually beta stimulants should be good because, as we'll see later, again, they reduce the production of alpha-synuclein and aggregation and protein dysfunction. And they seem to indicate that if people take beta blockers like propranolol, they seem to have a higher risk to develop Parkinson's disease. But this has been then kind of debunked a little bit because, and this is a German study that showed that, yes, it's true that beta agonists might prevent Parkinson's disease, but that's because beta agonists are given mostly to people that develop chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or chronic asthma, and that is usually secondary to smoking, which is a well-known protective factor for Parkinson's disease. So the jury is still out, and actually there is evidence, epidemiological evidence, that beta blockers like carvedilol or metoprolol might actually reduce the risk of developing Parkinson's disease. So while these discussions are settled, we decided to try to improve this heart signal in patients that don't yet have Parkinson's disease, but they are at a high risk of getting Parkinson's disease with a well-known adrenergic blocker that is called carvedilol. And you see the inclusion criteria of our study is having REM behavior disorders, which is easily diagnosed and quantified, and then at least one other, so to increase the risk even more to at least 30 times normal, either loss of smell, constipation, etc. And just to give you a little preview, the study is still ongoing. the carvedilol, the beta blocker, seems to indeed improve dramatically the heart function, the heart test. The heart is working well. This is the amount of noradrenaline hitting the heart, giving us a little bit of a glimpse of hope. We're going to follow these people over the years to see whether indeed we can reduce their chance of developing Parkinson's disease. And the DAS scan, the dopamine scan, the brain scan, remains perfectly normal, if not better. And that will tell us whether anything is spreading to the brain. And another medication that recently came to our attention is terazosin or Hytrin. Is a medication that is used for prostate hypertrophy. Is also an adrenergic receptor antagonist, and some studies coming out of Iowa show the man that takes terazosin for their prostate problems seems to have low incidence of Parkinson's disease, or with a large database, the PPMI, the Michael J. Fox large database, show that people that are on that medication, not that many, to be fair, only 15, but seems to have virtually no progression of the disease. So late onset and slower progression, which in and of itself, of course, is something very desirable. So we're also testing terazosin in premotor Parkinson's disease. And although it's very early, we have only a couple of subjects enrolled. Let's switch gears and look. Of course, these are all concepts that we are applying to pre-Parkinson's disease. Extremely interesting. Of course, in the future, that would be amazing to prevent Parkinson's disease. But a lot of people that already have Parkinson's disease might say, okay, that's very interesting, doctor, but what about me? I mean, can you do anything for someone that already has the disease? And the answer, of course, is yes. We're working extremely hard. We already heard from Dr. Mason earlier how exercise is definitely the single most important intervention that we can recommend. Eat well, sleep well, and exercise is always my advice. And we heard a lot already this morning, so we'll move on from that. And we'll focus on alpha-synuclein. Everybody knows about alpha-synuclein. Is a protein that is normally present in the brain. It's nothing that we don't have since birth, but at some point, for some reason that we don't fully understand, it starts to aggregate abnormally and form this abnormal fibers and blobs that we call the Lewy bodies. And the Lewy bodies are been for 100 years a marker of pathological degeneration in the brain of Parkinson's disease. So obviously, this abnormal aggregation has been a focus of research. If we can maybe prevent or slow down or stop the aggregation of this protein, maybe we're going to stop also Parkinson's disease. And there are many approaches. We can reduce the production of alpha-synuclein, and that's what the beta agonists that I mentioned earlier are focused to. We can reduce the aggregation, the abnormal aggregation, and cancer therapy, chemotherapy like nilotinib and similar medication have been focused on that. We can increase the intracellular degradation. Even if this alpha-synuclein aggregates poorly, we can kind of get rid of it quicker. And some medication that are repurposed, I'll get back later on the repurposing of medication like Ambroxol, which is a cough medication, have been trying to use on that. Or we can try to reduce the spread of these abnormal proteins with targeting them with antibodies or literally sort of vaccinations for Parkinson's disease. And so the extracellular, the degradation of these abnormal proteins when they try to kind of travel around the brain can be achieved either with active immunization, trying to stimulate the immune system to produce antibodies, not dissimilar to what now we're all doing against COVID, or with passive immunization, when we infuse antibodies that try to block the alpha-synuclein. This is a very, very active and very, very interesting areas of research that I'm going to touch upon. There are a number of these monoclonal antibodies, meaning that they're focused only on alpha-synuclein that have been introduced to the market. Prasinezumab is one of those, and is the first one that showed the ability to reduce the amount of alpha-synuclein circulating, and has been tested already in a large trial, which initially kind of led to some disappointment because, as you can see, whether people were on placebo, the blue line, or low or large dose of this antibody didn't seem to make too much of a difference. Therefore, we thought that we would give up on that, but as you can see, the hope remained because when we went to look at the motor scores that are typical of these scales, many here will be familiar with the UPDRS scales. The motor score actually seemed to be quite better than placebo, spurring a new wave of investment and investigation that resulted in a study that we currently ready to start at Cedars-Sinai and many other centers in the States and international. That's called the PADOVA study. And you see it's a global target of 250 patients. We are planning to enroll at least 10. And we want to see whether this infusion of antibodies against the alpha-synuclein will basically slow down the progression of the disease. And if anybody is interested, it's reserved to relatively early diagnose of Parkinson, not more than 3 years. They can be either unmedicated or medicated with levodopa, and they have to be with a DAT scan confirming the diagnosis, and relatively stable for the first 6 months. Let's switch gears and look at genetic Parkinson's disease. Now, Parkinson's disease is technically not a genetic disease, but we're learning a lot from a relatively uncommon but quite well characterized abnormality of the DNA that have been associated to Parkinson's disease. And you see here a number of them. We were part of an international study recently. It's called the ROPAD, the Rostock something genetic testing study, and we tested over 250 of our patients at Cedars-Sinai, and we found that even though in small percentage, a quite sizable part of our patient population is actually positive for this DNA mutation. The so-called GBA affected almost 15% of the tested subject and about 5% in the LRRK2 mutation. So we're very interested in looking into that because that can shed some light into Parkinson's disease. And most importantly, there are very specific efforts that are trying to target this specific abnormality and maybe provide for the first time some specific treatment for specific subtype of Parkinson's disease. Quite exciting, as you can imagine. Let's start with LRRK2 very quickly, because this is would require a separate presentation in and of itself, but LRRK2 is a large normal protein widely expressed, which seems to have something to do with the immune system and associated with Parkinson's disease, both sporadic, so it doesn't have to be familiar, but sporadic, and especially in some subgroup, for example, Ashkenazi heritage or North African Arab seems to have a relatively high incidence of this LRRK2 mutation. And it's been linked to a number of possible mechanisms associated with Parkinson's disease. You see alpha-synuclein, phosphorylation aggregation, inflammation, and energy generation or autophagy, which basically is the sanitation system of the cells. So it's a mutation that does not always results into Parkinson's disease, which is good news, but sometimes, you know, with age, it can go up to almost 70–75%, so quite a large number of people. And it looks like just Parkinson's disease. It doesn't have anything very specific. Actually, if anything, seems to be a little bit milder than a regular Parkinson's disease or non-LRRK2 associated. And what happened when you have a LRRK2 DNA mutation is that there is too much of it. There is too much of this LRRK2, and so we need to kind of slow it down. We need to put it down because it's present in too much, in too high level. And so there are at least two currently ongoing efforts. One is the Denali LRRK2 inhibitor. So again, something that tried to slow down the progression of the production of LRRK2, which is already shown in small population a target engagement, so inhibition of phosphorylated LRRK2. And then there is another very interesting effort, an antisense oligonucleotide that basically is going to block the RNA from producing the protein, which is a little bit more invasive, has to be infused inside the central nervous system, and it's ongoing in the phase 1 trial. So again, these are things that will come to our attention soon. And I find them extremely interesting because they might provide for the first time some specific solution for at least a subpopulation of our patients. Similar story, the GBA gene, which is being associated to another disease, is called Gaucher disease, and codes for an enzymes that facilitates the breakdown of certain protein in the cells. And the mutations of the GBA gene, as we've seen, is associated with about 15% of patients with Parkinson's disease. And it can also be a risk factor for Lewy body dementia. Unfortunately, we heard a lot about cognition today. And it is also similar to LRRK2 associated with a number of known mechanisms that can lead to degeneration and Parkinson's disease. Again, incomplete disease penetrance, meaning that not everybody that has the mutation can get Parkinson, tend to start a little bit earlier, have typical REM behavior disorder, a little bit more incidence of cognitive impairment and dementia, and more rapid disease progression. So it's a little bit less benign than the LRRK2. And in the case of the GBA, the problem is that there is a deficiency. It's a little bit kind of the opposite of the LRRK2. So there is too little of these enzymes, and so the cells cannot work. And there are already treatments for another disease that is associated with GBA deficiency, but this medication cannot be readily used for Parkinson because they don't cross the blood-brain barrier. And there are a number of strategies without getting too much into details. Ambroxol, as I mentioned earlier, is a medication that is used for cough, is available for cough, and showed an increase of alpha-synuclein and an increase in GBA values, and with improvement in the motor scores, although some symptoms are less responsive. And then, as you can see, there are a number of efforts that are going to be activated very soon to address the GBA mutation, but also people that don't have the GBA mutation, because these type of problems are somewhat specific to the DNA, but can be seen also in people that don't have that mutation. And that brings us to the last quick topic, drug repurposing. You see this number of medications that are already available. They're already approved by the FDA for a number of reasons, and they're being tried because of their specific mechanism of action into to change the progression or improve the symptom of Parkinson's disease. And the one that I want to focus on, in particular, we already saw the beta agonists and antagonists used, but with the one that I want to focus on is the diabetes medications, because we have spent a lot of time, we've done a lot of effort at Cedars working on some of these medications for Parkinson's disease. Many may ask, what the heck, why would you use a medication for diabetes in Parkinson's disease? I don't have diabetes, why should I use that? Well, the reality is that there is a lot of affinity between Parkinson's disease and diabetes. There are a lot of common genetic and molecular abnormalities that have been found between the two diseases. Both Parkinson's disease and diabetes can be associated with reduced exercise or increase or gain weight gain. And in general, there are two diseases that are associated with aging. So they have a lot in common. And in particular, they seem to have in common a particular problem that is called insulin resistance, which is the inability of the body to respond to insulin. And insulin resistance is, of course, very well known in diabetes, but it's also been described in Parkinson's disease in a large number of patients. Parkinson's disease, this is a study that we published at Cedars a few years ago, and we found that the over 60% of our subject with non-diabetic subject with Parkinson's disease had insulin resistance or prediabetes. So it's a very, very common situation, very often unknown or undiagnosed because the glucose, the sugar is normal, but the work that the body needs to do to keep that sugar normal, it's a lot, it's abnormal, and it may over time carry consequences. So there's been already a number of studies, in particular using a medication called exenatide that showed quite some improvement in patients with Parkinson's disease. It is a study that was performed in England. And we were interested to test this medication, liraglutide, that compared to exenatide seems to be even more similar to human GLP-1. And what does GLP-1 does? Basically, it improves the production of insulin, especially after having a meal. So we embarked into a study, the first and only, we're very proud to say, clinical trial worldwide testing this medication, liraglutide. It was a phase 2 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled. We accrued 63 subjects. We examined them at baseline, after 6 months, after 12 months. And we completed the recruitment, and we're currently reviewing the results. The results are unpublished, but I'm going to give you a quick preview, a quick sneak peek. This is the quality of life questionnaires, and you see how patients that were randomized to placebo had a worsening as expected to the quality of life over the year of the study, while those who were treated with the medication had a small but quite significant improvement as compared to the placebo. We need to work more on these results. It's a little bit early to sing victory, so to speak, but definitely we have enough signal to continue testing these medications. And again, as we said before, they may not be good for everybody, but they may provide a quite sizable improvement for at least a subpopulation of our patients. So Parkinson's disease, we know fastest growing among neurological diseases and fast growing knowledge. You heard today throughout the morning, non-motor symptoms, pre-motor, hallucinations, cognitive. We have so much, we know so much about the disease that we need to change our approach. Levodopa by itself is not enough. And as I mentioned, it may start several years before the onset of the so-called cardinal symptoms, opening a window of opportunity for early diagnosis, understanding of the disease, and disease-modifying treatment. Disease modification is, as I define it, the holy grail of research, and more trials are focusing on that, trying to, if not prevent, at least slow down the progression of the disease. This has brought to our attention non-dopaminergic therapies, again, something that goes beyond the levodopa and dopamine agonist that we have been using now for over 50 years. We have taken a look at genetic variants that are being discovered and then can play more of a role than initially believed. When I started being a neurologist Parkinson and genetics were completely unattached topics, but now we're starting to learn more about the DNA influence in Parkinson's disease. We review how insulin resistance, originally associated only to diabetes, might have a role in Parkinson's disease and might be a target for emerging therapies. And the concept of repurposing drug, in other words, using drugs that are already available, it will cut down on the development time and the development cost and bring efficient therapies, if they turn out to be efficient, of course, to the market to use much quicker. And I cannot end without thanking the wonderful program at Cedars-Sinai, all my collaborators and research coordinators, and also in the spirit of multi-disciplinary approach and neurosurgery, neuroimaging, and neuropsychology, Dr. Wertheimer. Thank you for your attention, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tagliati. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Great. I just went back to my other camera. What an exciting presentation. Wow. Really cool. Thank you for sharing those early results with us, by the way. That was really kind of exciting to see, kind of get us a glimpse into the middle of the process. So I found that really interesting. We have a couple of questions, and I actually have a question in regards to genetics. I have a friend whose grandfather had Parkinson's, his father had Parkinson's, and he has the LRRK2 gene. I was interested in that part of your presentation. Are there interventions for someone in his position? What are the potential risks or chances? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So yes, so as we have seen earlier, having the LRRK2 is not a definite sentence, so to speak. Obviously, having such a well-defined family history is a risk factor to at some point probably developing the disease, but it's not a necessary event. That's something that has to be stated. And even though at this stage there are no preventive therapy as far as we know, I think that the lifestyle approach that we have heard from Dr. Mason and emphasizing a reduction of the risk associated with weight gain, with lack of exercise, with lack of sleep. I was very happy to hear an emphasis on sleep, because I believe that Parkinson's disease at the end of the day is a sleep disorder, and many of the problems that our patients suffer from are from sleep deprivation more than anything else. So what I will tell to this gentleman, to any other that might have that kind of family history or that kind of genetic predisposition, is to really, short of at some point finding some treatment for LRRK2 abnormalities, to really emphasize daily exercise, discipline, sleeping habit, and a diet. That there is, we didn't talk too much about diet, but there is some evidence that that plant-based diet might be effective to prevent Parkinson's disease, although the science is still quite young.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so Donna has two questions. I think I can merge them. I have heard and read many times that the medical experts don't really understand how DBS works, but is there any evidence that DBS can cure or delay PD by modifying or resetting the electrical signals in the brain to return the brain to managing the dopamine effectively? And she also asks, can electrical pulses break up or reduce the alpha-synuclein proteins?
So great question. It's a $1 million question, or another $1 million question that we have been playing with since the very early use of deep brain stimulation. Can deep brain stimulation be neuroprotective? Now, I think that deep brain stimulation works at a completely different, on a completely different plane than the medication. And this is something that I always wanted to emphasize. I personally don't think, although there are some studies that seem to suggest that
Dr. Tagliati, we just got you're muted. Somehow you just got muted.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, you muted after some indications that I think is where we lost you.
Right. So there are some studies that seem to suggest an effect on dopamine, but I personally don't believe that deep brain stimulation increased the dopamine effect or has that kind of protective effect. Definitely, there are studies. Actually, we published some of that data showing that at least the typical, the motor symptom of Parkinson's disease don't seem to progress, meaning even the off stimulation severity of the disease several years after studying the brain stimulation doesn't progress. But what unfortunately progresses is the non-motor part of the disease. So we have to remember that Parkinson is not only dopamine, unfortunately, because if it was only dopamine, we would already have plenty of support for that system. And so the question is, does it improve or prevents the degeneration of the motor system? Possibly. But unfortunately, as we heard from many of our speakers today, Parkinson is a multi-system disorder, and DBS action is very, very limited to the motor system. And that, I think, is the limit. Deep brain stimulation has revolutionized the treatment of Parkinson's disease, and I think that is a major, major option for many of our advanced patients. But I'm not sure that is going to answer the questions of neurodegeneration and neuroprotection.
Okay, thank you for that. Your thoughts on focused ultrasound?
Focused ultrasound, as you might know, is a technique, is a surgical techniques that can provide what has been done for many, many years, which is basically a thalamotomy. In other words, a small lesion in the part of the brain that is called the thalamus, but without the need to open the skull and to penetrate the brain with a wire or with something to reach the thalamus. So it's publicized as a non-surgical treatment, which is true to some degree because the intervention inside the brain is surgical, meaning there is a lesion caused into the brain, and it's been found to be quite successful in treating tremors. Now, the data about Parkinson's disease, which is not only tremors, as many of our listeners know, is a little bit less definitive. And historically, we know that thalamotomies did not treat Parkinson's disease, but only tremors. So if someone has essential tremor, which is a monosymptomatic disease, meaning there is only tremor, then focused ultrasound in good hands, because it's a fairly early technique, in good hands can be definitely a good option in alternative to deep brain stimulation. For Parkinson's disease, which would require also a bilateral thalamotomies, which historically has been associated with a lot of problems, including speech and cognitive decline, I would be a little bit more prudent. It's probably early to jump into that.
Okay, and I think if you stop sharing your screen, we'll have a bigger image of you as we go through these questions.
Stop share. There you go.
There it is. Yeah, I think that's better. Okay. I lost sense of smell 15 years ago. Doctors couldn't diagnose Parkinson's. I was diagnosed 5 years ago. How can the medical community get more educated?
That's a fantastic question. And first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. And to give a break to the doctors, I mean, the loss of smell in and on itself, it would not lead to a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, although I have more and more people coming to my clinic, maybe just with constipation or just with REM behavior disorder, or just with loss of smell, to question whether they should worry. There is a need for education, I agree, and for multidisciplinary education. And also there is a need of education for our population, because unfortunately, these symptoms are not always a cause of concern. Most people lose their smell, they think they have a sinusitis, or they have some problems with their nose. Human beings don't really use their smell similar to what, for example, our dogs does to discover the world. It's a kind of a primitive sense for us. I mean, it's fun to smell grandma, food or a good perfume or flowers, but in reality, we don't really use the smell. So if we lose the smell, many people don't even think of going to the doctor. And similar is said sometimes, most of the time, for constipation, maybe we get some Miralax over the counter. So what we will need to do is to emphasize that this apparently innocent symptoms might over time bring to neurodegeneration. But our responsibility in terms of research and medical research is then to do something with that. Because just to know that you might have Parkinson's disease in 15 years is not quite exciting. Actually, it's quite not good news. And I would not give it unless, as we're trying to do now, we can provide some form of intervention that makes understanding these early symptoms worth. I don't know, it's interesting to know, but if you have nothing to do, sometimes it's better not to know. Now, in general terms, as I said for the LAR2, obviously knowing that there is an impending problem might stimulate a change of lifestyle and increase exercise and improve diet and improve sleep practices. So that in and itself would be a good thing to do, and definitely would be worth the educational. But I agree 100% that at some point we will need to face the need to be aware that this apparently innocent symptoms may not be that innocent over the long term.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any advances lately in stem cell research relating to Parkinson's?
I was hoping to, I was hoping not to get into stem cells. Yes, there are a lot of advances, and I kind of steered away a little bit from the stem cells story because even though there are, we have a very active stem cells lab at Cedars, and we have actually found some very interesting news regarding the potential mechanism leading to Parkinson's disease using stem cells. So using stem cells as a study or almost diagnostic tool, not as a treatment tool. The problem that I personally find bothersome with using stem cells is that we don't know what Parkinson's disease is, but we're trying to supplement something. And of course, what we're trying to supplement is dopamine cells, but we have just seen, I'm just trying to explain how dopamine cells is definitely a big part of the problem, but not the only problem. So supplementing, even if we are successful in supplementing dopamine cells with stem cells, we still have to solve all the other problems. And so I'm not sure that will be, now I'm going to be very happy to be wrong if the studies, for example, currently conducted in Japan will bring conclusive results. But I think that we should spend more time trying to understand better what Parkinson's disease is, where it starts, which system it affects, before trying to supplement this or that population. I don't know, it's like in a global, and I don't want to use a terrible example, but in a global war, you know, we concentrate all on one part of the world, but there are so many other fires going on somewhere else, and we use all our troops in one little part of the world, I'm not sure that will be the winning strategies, but that's my personal opinion. And that's why I didn't spend too much time, actually no time, reviewing the current stem cells treatment programs.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we'll toss this one last question out here from Donna. We define Parkinson's disease as a group of symptoms, and a large array of symptoms are shared by other diseases, and our focus on symptoms is slowing down and complicating our search for a cause and a cure. How can we employ metadata and artificial intelligence to guide our research? Do we have metadata? How's that for a last question?
It's a very interesting question, but I would not. I mean, at the end of the day, symptoms is what we have. I mean, even artificial intelligence needs to work with the symptoms, and the problem obviously is that the symptom is a symptom, meaning it's just something that I feel or that I show, and that doesn't tell me necessarily what is going on, because as the question mentioned, there are symptoms that are common to other diseases. Of course, big data and artificial intelligence can be helpful to handle, to give us more significant information, but we still need the good idea. I mean, if I feed the wrong idea to a big data cruncher, to artificial intelligence, is going to go down my wrong idea. So I think that's following the symptoms, as I try to explain, with using the pre-motor stage, is actually something that we need to do with more courage. What I find most research is doing these days is trying to bring everything back to dopamine, right? So we're finding a pre-motor stage with REM behavior disorder, with smell, with constipation. Okay, let's see how dopamine can explain those, instead of forgetting the dopamine for a moment and see, okay, where did this symptom come from? That's where the artificial intelligence or larger data crunching can definitely help. But we need to follow our leads without trying to bring everything back to what we already know. That's, to me, is the biggest obstacle to really figure out what Parkinson's disease is.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tagliati, for your time and for your overwhelming compassion and thought about how to help this community of ours. I've been honored to know you for a long time, and you are an exceptional human being. And I know that you make a difference in many people's lives. And I know you're trying to make a huge difference in everyone's life with the research you're doing. So we're really lucky to have you. Thank you for serving on our research advisory board. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And thank you for these amazing words, Patrick. I truly appreciate it. And it's been a great pleasure to know you since literally the very first weeks that I moved to Los Angeles. And you are yourself doing a lot for this community, both with your specific background and expertise, but also organizing these amazing events. Thank everybody for attending today. It's been an honor, and enjoy your weekend.
Okay, thank you again. Okay, once again, we're so glad that you've joined us today for our annual education conference. Our education programs, our support groups, information and referral services, and more are all free for the community. If you're enjoying today's program, please consider making a tax-deductible donation at PCLA.org. We have an additional, oh, we already read that. Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry.
Hey, Patrick, we lost your mic.
There we go. Okay. You got me now? I think so. It's a good thing, because I was just repeating something I had said earlier. We hope to see all of you at our future online events and/or at our virtual support groups. We have 15 support group meetings every month, including special groups for caregivers, young onset Parkinson's, women with Parkinson's, adult children of a parent with Parkinson's, and more. We also have a Spanish language support group, and we are launching a new weekly Spanish dance class in the new year. All these programs take place over Zoom, so you can join from anywhere you are. We also have a YouTube channel where you can stream our online events anytime, and you'll see a link to that in the chat, or you can subscribe to our channel for free on YouTube. And we'll be sending more information on our support groups, and you can always visit our online calendar up on our website at pcla.org to see what's coming up next. After we close this event, we'll be opening up the Life Beyond the Basics room meetings. It will take us about 2 or 3 minutes. I think we're shooting for 1:10 p.m. to readmit everybody there and get set up. So please feel free to stretch your legs before joining us there. You will see an email in your box right now with a direct link to join that meeting. Special thanks again to our presenters today and to our wonderful sponsors, Acadia, Abbott, AbbVie, Boston Scientific, Medtronic, and the Sandy Yaris Parkinson's Hero Fund. Our sponsors not only partner with us to bring you programs like this for free, but they are also wonderful sources for information and resources on living well with Parkinson's. And I'm glad that you'll have the opportunity to chat with them in a little bit in the breakout meeting room. I'm excited to see you there as well. Thanks again, everyone. Have a safe and wonderful holiday.